Committee will be in order, and thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started with the knowledge that a good number of our members are flying in this afternoon, and I'm delighted that each of you have joined us. We'll have two pieces of legislation that we're considering today. First, the committee will consider H.R. 2610, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2014. This bill funds the important work of the Department of Transportation as well as Department of Housing and Urban Development. Today's bill provides for over $44 billion to ensure that America's roads, bridges, railways, pipelines, and airports remain safe and operational. Additionally, H.R. 2610 ensures that this nation continues to provide housing and community development opportunities for the neediest Americans. I want to thank the subcommittee chairman, the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Latham, and the ranking member, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price, for joining us today, and look forward to their testimony. Before we go too far, I have a family from Waxahachie, Texas. They're very dear friends of mine. Mr. Barksdale, the gentleman who is former mayor of Waxahachie, is joined today by his young wife and daughter Caroline and Chase, their son. And Jay Barksdale and family, I want to say thank you very much for visiting our nation's capital. Mr. Barksdale is the vice president of the Greater Dallas Chamber of Commerce and a former senior member of Mr. Martin Frost, a former member of this Rules Committee, his staff, and Mr. Barksdale has been a longtime associated with Mr. Frost, and I want to acknowledge Mr. Barksdale and his family. Thank you so much for joining us here today. With that said, the gentleman from Florida will be representing the minority today, and he has insisted upon me stating that he is delighted that we are welcoming not only Mr. Price, but also Mr. Latham. And so if I could have you two gentlemen please join us at the head table. Please do remember that sometimes it's easier for us to hear you when you do turn on the microphone. As always, it is our hope that you will come with something in writing without objection. We will enter that into the record. We're delighted that you're both here. Both of you bring from the Appropriations Committee ideas about making our country stronger and better. I know each of you, I know in person, I know each of you are strong in your leadership and wanting to work for the best interests of this great nation. And I'm delighted on behalf of the committee that both of you have taken time to be here. And Mr. Latham, without objection, we're going to have you go ahead and start the testimony. Gentleman's recognized.
All right. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hastings, all the members of the committee for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Appropriations Committee and H.R. 2610, the Transportation, Housing, Urban Development Appropriation Act for fiscal year 2014. Along with Chairman Rogers, and I hope my friend here, Mr. Price, I'm requesting an open rule waiving all points of order against consideration of the THUD bill. I will make my remarks very brief because of the busy schedule I know that you have here, Mr. Chairman, today. The committee has put forth a bill that conforms with our 302B allocation of $44.1 billion in budget authority and is in line with the House budget of $967 billion. Under such an allocation, we prioritize the programs and spending, and we're able to achieve three really important goals. Meet the OBLIM funding levels of MAP 21, which is the Highway Authorization Bill, keep the commercial airspace running smoothly, and preserve the housing option for all HUD-assisted families under lease in fiscal year 2014. The THUD bill really needs to have its day before the House of Representatives, Mr. Chairman. Considering there still isn't an agreement on sequester or a top-line budget number, it's imperative that we realign the funds available under sequester to ensure that DOT and HUD have the resources they need to care for the population and infrastructure of this nation. I'd like to thank my good friend, even he's in transit, the gentleman from Arizona, and the THUD ranking member, Mr. Pastor, for his comedy and willingness to discuss what would be possible under a $44.1 billion allocation. I'd also like to thank Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Lowy, plus the members of the committee, and especially the subcommittee for their hard work in getting the bill to this point. As you know, we've gone through subcommittee, full committee, open process. I think that's very, very important. And I thank you for your time and consideration, and hope for your favorable consideration of our request. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I would yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Latham, thank you very much. We do appreciate
you,
you being here. And in fact, I do want to acknowledge that Mr. Pasteur is the ranking member, and we had him on here and then recognized that he could not be here. Mr. Price, thank you very much for not only filling in for Ed, but I know that your ideas and your content, intellectual content with these ideas is very important, and we're delighted that you are with us today. If you'll please, and I will later pass on to Ed, that I'm sorry we missed him, but I'm sure that you will you'll do the great work that's necessary. With that said, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am happy to be here in lieu of Ranking Member Ed Pasteur, who sends his regards and who notes what Chairman Latham has also said, that they've had a good working relationship this year and previously, and appreciate the chance to work collaboratively. That working relationship, as we all know, is bumping up against an unfortunate, indeed impossible allocation. So that's the basic problem we're dealing with this bill, not any lack of goodwill or cooperative attitude. It's simply an impossible allocation. It reflects the discretionary spending caps adopted of the majority in the House budget resolution. And because the defense and homeland security bills were sheltered from these cuts, then the hit on our domestic bills was made even worse. This is a familiar story, but this bill before us demonstrates it in a very, very striking way. Simply fails to adequately address the infrastructure and housing needs that the hearings brought out before our subcommittee. The bill makes deep cuts to the capital programs of the Federal Aviation Administration, Amtrak, Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Grant Program. It zeroes out funding for the Tiger program, which has been enormously successful in advancing critical surface transportation projects across the country. And once again, the bill includes no funding for the development of high-speed rail. The cuts are even deeper for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Within HUD, the bill reduces funding for the Community Development Block Grant Program to $1.6 billion. That's the lowest level since the program was created in 1975. The Home Program is funded at $700 million, its lowest level since the program began in 1992. The bill rescinds funding for choice neighborhoods, which means the bill lacks funding for any comprehensive housing revitalization program whatsoever. I do want to commend the Chairman for funding the critical safety missions of the Department of Transportation and for honoring the obligation limitations in the surface and aviation bills. In addition, while there are reductions to the FAA's operations account, I hope there are sufficient funds to avoid additional furloughs. Chairman also included sufficient funding to move 10,000 more homeless veterans off the streets and into housing. However, despite these efforts, the ranking member and I have great concerns with this bill as it's currently written. The insufficient allocations means there will be few meaningful improvements to the bill on the floor because, as everyone knows, the amendment process requires us to rob Peter to pay Paul. I remain hopeful we can achieve a more realistic allocation as the appropriations process moves forward. This week, the Senate's taking up its version of this very bill, which would invest nearly $10 billion more than the House bill. I think we can do better than the bill before us today. If we must take the bill up at this point, I want to join the Chairman in requesting an open rule. But there's a good deal of suspicion that the only reason the majorities included the Transportation and Housing Bill in this rule in the first place is because the rule for the Defense Appropriations Bill that we're considering this week isn't as open as some of our colleagues would like. So there's an irony here, tacking an open rule on an inadequate domestic spending bill in order to win support for a restrictive rule for a bill whose our allocation comes at the expense of our domestic priorities. There is an irony in that. I doubt that it's lost on any of us. For all of these reasons, I urge the Rules Committee not to grant a rule today at all, but to wait instead for a more appropriate time and a more adequate allocation before we consider amendments to the Transportation HUD bill. And I thank you and yield back.
I thank the testimony from the gentleman. To answer his question, we're going to get our work done today. We're going to be forthright about that. We're going to take testimony. We're going to allow the process, as the young chairman from Iowa has said, through regular order. And we're delighted that you were here, and I want to thank you very much for not only your feedback to us, but also your advice, which we do take to heart in recognizing that the needs of this great nation, whether it be transportation, rail, or our airports or seaports, they're all vitally important. And it is a difficult time that we find ourselves in, and we're going to have to hopefully work through this, engaging not just the United States Senate, but also the President of the United States as we move forward. And I want to thank both of you very much for your testimony this afternoon. Gentlemen, Mr. Bishop is recognized. No questions. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
No, I want to thank you both for being here, but I want to associate myself with the comments of Mr. Price. I mean, the allocations for these appropriations bills, especially on transportation and housing, are just so unbelievably low. They're not workable, and they can't stand this way. I mean, $1.6 billion has been cut from the CDBG program. That's almost obliterates the program, leaves it with the lowest funding since 1975. And Mr. Chairman, you were great last year speaking out against an amendment that would have cut the CDG program by far, far less. And you were right back then. And again, the allocations are not your fault. Well, the fault of those who voted for these restrictions and voted for sequestration and allowed it to come into play and voted for the Ryan budget. I mean, these are. I mean, I get him. We have cities and towns in my district that are crumbling, where infrastructure is just falling apart. And anybody who thinks you're going to save money and balance the budget or reduce the deficit by cutting some of these programs that are important investments, I think you're wrong, because any short-term savings that you may get in the long term, we're going to pay dearly. I'm not sure this will ever come to the floor, but we're going to attach it to another rule in defense, and we'll go from there. But I appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman, the chairman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no specific questions because I have the privilege of sitting on both the subcommittee and the committee from which this legislation comes. Just want to make a couple of quick points. I know both of you would prefer a higher allocation. Who wouldn't? But I think we have to remember sequesters the law of the land just as much as the budget, act is. And, that was a law that was advocated by the President of the United States. And I think our side would be more than willing to sit down with him and renegotiate where the cuts come from. We ought to move, we all know this, to the non-discretionary side of the budget. That's where the savings are at. And the President in the past has actually put some things on there, everything from changed CPI to means testing for Medicare to $400 billion worth of cuts. I still think there's a solution out there to be had, but until the administration is willing to sit down and help us work that way, then all the discretionary budgets are going to labor under the challenges that my good friend Mr. Latham, Chairman Latham, is dealing with right now. So hopefully that will happen. Hopefully we can then arrive at a number that is a lot more palatable to all concerned. And if we do, the one wonderful thing about this committee is it does work very well together. Chairman Latham and Ranking Member Pastor, and honestly every member on that committee, it's a really fine committee, and they're problem solvers by nature. So if the folks above them can solve this problem in terms of redistributing the cuts from the sequester, I have no doubt that the subcommittee will bring us a product that its members and the rest of the Congress will be far happier with than what we're looking at right now. So if you have a response, I see my friend, that's fine. Otherwise, I'd yield back my time.
Does the gentleman wish to?
Could I make just a brief response?
Please, absolutely.
I understand that we have have the potential, I think. We haven't lost it completely. Let's hope not. The potential to arrive at a long-term budget plan that lets us lift the sequester and achieve fiscal sustainability and also sustain this recovery. I don't think it's beyond the capacity of our body to do that, but we certainly have had a tough time with it. I can think of two paths forward right now, and both, unless I miss something, both are being rejected by the House leadership. One would be simply to go to conference and work out a budget resolution. That would no doubt produce a result nobody's totally happy with, but it would have the kind of comprehensive, balanced approach that we learned in the 90s is necessary to serious deficit reduction. The second would be to take the President up on his offer of December to address the real drivers of the deficit, tax expenditures, tax loopholes, and entitlement expenditures. Ironically, sequestration just keeps hitting again and again and again these appropriated accounts that have already borne the brunt of our efforts. I hope it's not hoping too much or wishing too much to think that one of those paths might be open to us in the weeks ahead.
I share my friend's hope, but I think it's worth noting, we did get a considerable tax increase in January. We're having a considerable tax increase now associated with the affordable health care legislation. And, the sequester with the flip side. We had revenue increases with no spending cuts, and then we got spending cuts with no revenue increases. Now, again, I think each side was willing to negotiate. I think the President was willing to negotiate where the revenue came from and even at what levels. As to some degree he did. But he was pretty insistent that those were going to occur, and they occurred without spending cuts. So I'm never surprised that spending cuts that were already written into law, just like the end of the Bush tax cuts were also going to be insisted upon. Now, again, I think the Speaker and I think the Republicans are more than willing to negotiate where those cuts come from. We don't think this is a particularly good way to proceed forward. But you're not going to get, two rounds of revenue increases for one round of spending cuts. That's just not likely to occur. And so when the White House, I think, comes to realize that, hopefully we can sit down. Hopefully it's not too far from now.
Well, as the gentleman well knows, the $600 billion in revenue increases fall short of everyone's projections as to what is required, and moreover, they came on top of $1.5 trillion in spending cuts. We've cut $1 trillion out of the projected 10-year budget on domestic discretionary. We've cut $500 billion out of defense spending, and yes, we got some of the revenue increases associated with the fiscal cliff.
Make a quick point back. As my friend knows, the President could have gotten a lot more revenue if he wanted it. He chose the amount that could be. He's the one that said 450, not 250. He let cap gains and dividends move from 15 to 20, not up to 28 or 39 or some other figure. I'm hardly the one to be critical of that, but that was a choice he made. And I think it was incredibly naive to think I'm going to let revenue go up when I could let it go up more, and then I'm going to come back and expect the other side to vote additional increases. But I share my friend's hope that we can find a way around this, because I don't think it's a good way to govern. And every compromise that we've had, the budget act of April of 2007, the debt ceiling deal, even the fiscal cliff deal, I voted for. So I'm willing to try to find middle ways and compromises, and those were all legislation and remedies that the President also supported and were bipartisan in nature. So hopefully we can get there. I share my friend's hope that we haven't lost that capacity. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Flores, Arkansas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I join in welcoming our guests from Waxahachie, and I know they aren't going to tire of living there, but if they ever do and would like a namesake community, I represent Loxahatchee in Florida, so it's kind of close, a different kind of community, which brings into play a lot of what this measure is about, and that is issues that deal with our infrastructure. I find it ironic that the acronym for this bill, and how it's being referenced here in the Capitol is thud. And that's exactly what's getting ready to happen to the American public once they recognize all of the cuts. And I echo the sentiments of Mr. Price, the ranking member, and my close friend here on the committee, Mr. McGovern, without reiterating the things that they have pointed out. I suggest that we're living in extraordinary times where people who are wealthy enough to afford to help with revenue to cover some of these things that we know are needed are simply unwilling or unable to do so. I heard a comment today from the Speaker of the House that people are hesitant to invest in America because of the regulatory impositions of the Obama administration. It seems that everything wrong in this country, if it's left to our friends on the other side, have to do with President Obama. It's as if we don't exist, or that the obstruction, particularly in the United States Senate, goes unnoticed and no one comments about it. But let me come to what I think our responsibilities are here without delving into how much it's needed that we do the things that are vital for our infrastructure. I happen to be here this weekend, and in Prince George's County, you talking about a royal mess that was avoided with water issues. And I don't know how many of you have paid very much attention to the number of issues of flash flooding in this near Curtilage, particularly Alexandria and the city of Washington. But all over this nation, if we are mindful, our infrastructure is in desperate straits. But what I would bring to the chair's attention is that every single appropriations bill this Congress has considered has been under an open rule. And yet the majority has decided to shut down the process for defense and preclude members from offering amendments freely on the floor. I think that's a big mistake, and I think it flies in the face of tradition on this committee, and particularly for the Defense Committee. It is there where members are more than likely to raise issues of vital concern to our nation, and without an opportunity to do so, it just simply does not make sense to me. And therefore, I join those who would protest a restrictive rule, Mr. Chairman, and I'll speak more to that as time progresses. Thank you so very much.
Appreciate the comments from the gentleman, and I want to thank him for, as always, being very free and open about expressing his comments, and especially with the recognition that he does believe, as I do, that hearing amendments, trying to make it as open a process as we can, I believe is in the best interest of this body. Thank you very much. I appreciate the gentleman's comments. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I just want to ask the chair, to follow up with my colleague from Florida, again, traditionally we have this under a rule that allows for members who aren't on the committee of jurisdiction from across this House to propose ideas and work the will of the House. I would just ask the gentleman if he's afraid of the will of the House or majority of the House, or what other reason could there be for not allowing the House to work its will on this bill? Yes.
I thank you for the question. I'm asking for an open rule.
Okay.
On the THUD bill.
Oh, excellent. Good. So hopefully we'll grant that.
We're just representing transportation, housing, urban development here.
Oh, okay. So that's good. Hopefully.
No, we're asking for an open rule on this. Right.
Okay, I was following. Well, good. Well, that is very exciting. I have a tradition of supporting open rules. I supported an open rule from this committee on the floor of the House 2 weeks ago, and I fully plan on, if this is an open rule, I plan on lending my support to it as well. I'll yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
No, the bad news, it may not ever come to the floor, so.
Well, if it does come to the floor, I will be happy to
I will protest.
lend my support for an open rule. I think it's very important to let the House work its will. I'm glad the gentleman is not afraid of the will of the House on this matter, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to work our will in this bill, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman's comments, and I want to thank both of you for not only taking time to be with us today, but your forthrightness about your ideas about where we're headed and how we're going to get there. I will just remember what I'm reminded every time I am in front of constituents in Dallas, Texas, and that is 1,000 billions is a trillion. 1,000 billions is a trillion, and we have, in CDBG funds, we cut 1.6 billion. We have to cut 1,000 billions to get to a trillion. We're spending at least a trillion too much now. And so what happens is when spending exceeds revenues, you run this terrible deficit, and we've run over $1.2 trillion deficit all 4 years up to now. And at some point that becomes, as has been described, a national threat. A threat against the nation, almost that outranks almost any other threat that we could have. And so I think that Mr. Latham and the committee, in attempting to work together on an issue, whether you completely agree with it or not, but where you see the need, is a difficult task. And I respect both of you for coming here with your ideas, and we will continue to struggle on this issue as a committee. I don't know if the gentleman would like to be recognized for the purpose of entering into the record the SAP, but if anyone would like to do that, we can enter that into the record. A gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Unanimous consent that the administration's statement of policy be put in the record on this bill.
Without objection, that will be entered. Gentleman's recognized.
Yeah, inside the statement of the administration is the recommendation that staff would offer that the measure be vetoed if it were to come to the floor like this.
In fact, once again, the President has said that he does not support this bill, and I respect the gentleman for that. Gentleman from Massachusetts. Right.
Can I ask unanimous consent to include the record the statement of Congressman Rick Larson of Washington?
Without objection, that will be entered to the record. I now see we've been joined by the gentleman from Florida. I don't know if he has any desire for time at this time. Gentlemen, it's not requesting time. I want to thank both of you for being here, and you're now excused. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman does not see any other member that is here to give testimony, so the hearing portion of H.R. 2610, Transportation, Housing, Urban Development, and Related Agencies, Appropriations Act 2014, will now close. We will now begin the second part of our hearing, and for DOD appropriations testimony. The committee will now hear testimony on H.R. 2397, the Department of Defense Appropriations Act, H.R. 2397, which funds our nation's defense and provides the resources necessary to continue our military efforts abroad. It also provides funding for the needs of our active duty troops, reserves, and their family. Finally, it makes difficult choices to ensure that we save taxpayer dollars without undermining the safety, security, and success of our military, a careful balance. Thanks in part to this bill, the work that was done by the committee and also the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bill Young. The United States military is well served not only by his service as well as the people of Tampa, Florida, but I believe that the military throughout his service has understood how important Bill Young is as a strong voice for our military, the men and women who serve therein, and I am delighted that we welcome the gentleman, Mr. C.W. Bill Young, and also Peter Voskowski, who will join us from Indiana, and both gentlemen are recognized. I would remind you both, if you can, Peter, please remember to push that little button in there. It helps us to hear even better. Without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered into the record. And Mr. Chairman, welcome. I'm delighted that you're here, and we would love to hear from you. Gentlemen is recognized.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for hearing our request for a rule today for the Defense Appropriations Bill for 2014. This committee has spent months in hearings and in classified briefings that Mr. Visklosky attended every one of them and is a great partner in the preparation of this legislation. Mr. Cole is a very important member of our subcommittee as well, so any really detailed questions we direct them to him because he made copious notes during all of the hearings and all of the briefings. The committee recommendation for fiscal year 2014 is somewhat screwed up, if you don't mind me using the term, because of sequestration. It's convoluted. We did the best we could to balance out the budgets. Our bill is $512.5 billion. It's $3.4 billion below the CBO estimate of the President's request, and approximately $28.1 billion above the estimated fiscal year 2013 sequestration level. The recommendation for overseas contingency operations is $85.8 billion, which is $1.5 billion below last year's level. The details of this bill have been available for months. We postponed them, we positioned them on the website for everyone to see back in June. And so let me just hit a couple of the highlights. We added $580 million to fully funded the authorized military pay raise. We had $536 million to fully fund the anticipated fuel costs that are basically required. We had $90 million to fully fund the second Virginia-class submarine in 2014. We had $692 million for military medical research, including $246 million for cancer research and $125 million for traumatic brain injury, TBI. In the OCO accounts, $1.5 billion for the National Guard and Reserve Equipment account, $1.1 billion for depot maintenance shortfalls, $1.3 billion for Army reset requirements, and $1.1 billion for the OCO Transfer Fund to provide flexibility in addressing unanticipated or emergency OCO costs. While we could have used more, we did the best we could with what we had. I believe that we have provided the nation with its readiness that is required, and we have made sure that our troops were taken proper care of. And so, Mr. Chairman, would you like to yield if you have any objection to Mr. Visklosky? And he has been a stalwart member of this committee for a long time. And as the ranking member, he has just done an outstanding job and been with us every step of the way through our hearings and our briefings.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your testimony. Obviously, Mr. Visklosky comes to this committee before you had stated so with not only high credentialing and accolades, but he came with the knowledge we were aware that he has worked very closely with you with the concern and care about members of the military, about the ability that we have to effectively protect our country and to ensure that the men and women who carry our flag are treated with respect and dignity, and he is known that way, and I welcome the gentleman. And Bill, thank you very much for your kind words about him. The gentleman from Indiana is now recognized.
Chairman, thank you very much for your kind words, and I do think Chairman Young has summarized the bill very well. I would indicate that I strongly support the underlying bill. Once again, the Defense Subcommittee under Chairman Young's leadership and the Appropriations Committee has produced a bipartisan bill in a very transparent and cooperative fashion. that provides for the needs of U.S. troops at home and abroad. The funding and priorities set in this bill are of vital importance to the quality of life, readiness, and investments in our armed forces. We have also, in addition to the notes that the chairman has indicated, significant language and investment to begin to adequately deal with the issue of sexual assault in the military, as well as other profound problems that we continue to face. And would point out, because it is a spending bill, there are cuts in this bill. There is a cut of $617.8 million from the Joint Strike Fighter program. The subcommittee cuts $400 million on an execution program under the Defense Health Program. We have a $112 million reduction as far as Army travel and others. So again, the subcommittee in their work looked at each account, added, modified, or in many instances also cut. What I would say, Mr. Chairman, because we are in the Rules Committee, is that I do request that the committee report an open rule for the consideration of this bill, and do appreciate, one, the opportunity of working with the chair and all the members of the subcommittee, as well as the opportunity you and the committee members have afforded us today.
I thank the gentleman not only for his kind words, but also for his working together to ensure that the product that comes here, as difficult as it is, was done together. I also do want to acknowledge the statement from the gentleman, C.W. Bill Young, about our member, the young chairman from Oklahoma, Tom Cole. His service to the Appropriations Committee was a strong attribute about getting him back on the Rules Committee. We have a need to not just be able to effectively deal with the appropriations bills, but really to take the very best from the committee. And we feel like that Tom's challenges that he brings to the committee and our understanding about how we're going to approach these bills comes well grounded within the financial integrity from his home district, where he sees firsthand, in particular, the basis of government spending, the military, and other attributes. And I want to thank you, Bill, for such strong comments about our great colleague and his service, not only to Oklahoma, that we've seen him through, but also again today. I would like to, as I do each year and have done probably for the past 10 years, to speak with both of you. I'll aim my comments probably to the gentleman, Mr. Young, but to let you know that I have once again engaged on an important issue for me, traumatic brain injury. And I have contacted some of our colleagues in the United States Senate to let them know that I believe that I have adequately and I think well and faithfully executed some discussion with the committee about the use of TBI funds being available for veterans to where they don't have to beg to go get private sector, the very best of private sector help. I believe that the Department of Defense, I don't need to go out of my way to say that I have been displeased with them, but we have been unable to, I think, adequately address the needs of many of our veterans. The gentleman, Mr. Young, is aware that one of our nation's finest, a young man who served as a SEAL in the United States Navy, Chris Kyle, was killed in a murder that occurred in or near Dallas, Texas, along with another member of the retired military. They were veterans trying to help other veterans. And as is generally the case, men and women of the military are the first to recognize the needs of family members and others and are trying to do the very best. But I believe there should be a better partnership. And so it's my hope that as both of you engage the United States Senate or the military in the defense of what I think will be an amendment that could be made in order on TBI, it's my hope that you will both strongly resist tampering with or taking out this ability for us to approach what I believe is a disaster that will continue to harm our country until we adequately allow an opportunity for the government to assist these families that are dealing with their family members, the men and women of our military who have traumatic brain injury. I could go on about what I believe is the right thing to do, but I want them to know that we stand in their court. And so my request as a person who's been engaged in this for over 10 years, it's my hope that you will remember this amendment as very important and remember the life of the young Chris Kyle, a Navy SEAL who gave his life in defense of a fellow military person, and that I believe the government has, and we as members of Congress have an obligation to help that out. So much of my ideas, it's my hope that you'll remember that and not take lightly any objections that might come at that process this year, because I think now more than ever it needs to occur, and I thank the gentleman very much. I don't know if the gentleman wishes to respond or not.
Just let me say, Mr. Chairman, your comments are certainly well received.
Thank you, Mr. Young.
And Mr. Chairman, I might just add that the committee did add $125 million to that program over and above the administration's request as an additional add of $4 million for substance abuse, but would point out that it's not just a question of money, and I think you would agree with this, is how we run these programs. One of the things that has certainly caught the chairman's eye, mine, and the members of the subcommittee is we can have a plethora of programs. And maybe sometime we have too many. It's how you spend that money, too. So that is as much of a concern of ours as it is the additional funding, but appreciate your concern very much.
Yes, sir. Well, to be more specific, the gentleman Mike Thompson, who is a young member of our body from California, and I have worked on this for a long time, and specifically what it does is it allows veterans, many times retired veterans, to be able to access a fund to be able to go to private sector alternatives that might not be available to them in the VA system, to have these, that what might be leading edge opportunities for them to try and seek additional help. It is not too many programs. It is one that the Wounded Warriors has chosen for a number of years, that they've privately funded a few soldiers rather than a lot of soldiers. And we believe that the Department of Defense, once again, I've stated I don't need to go after each other or them or anybody else or call each other names, but I do not believe that we've had a matching of ideas about how important this is. And it was highlighted to me once again as the tragedy occurred with the incident that occurred in Dallas or near Dallas, Texas. And I think that it's these kinds of things that should be learned rather than being taught again. And what it does is allows a family, a person to be able to come and get funds and go to a place which provides them the leading edge opportunities rather than going to a VA or some other VA facility to work through the programs. They go to the very best that is available. And I believe it's critical that that be done this year. So I've done my very best. I will continue to seek out the support that I get from the United States Senate and will be very public this year about my support of that just because of the circumstance that occurred. So thank you very much. A gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Thank you. I want to echo the comments everyone has made, Mr. Chairman, about your service and the ranking member's service. Mr. Young, your service as chairman of the full committee and as well as this particular subcommittee has been long and very favorable, and I appreciate that. Appreciate what you all have done in attempting to deal specifically with this particular budget area. This is a budget that is going to be treated differently than the others. You had half a sequestration coming upon you, which is a disproportionate amount, and unlike the other budget areas that are coming on, it came to you on the top of not an increase in funding, but actually two other military cuts that were ahead of it. So in essence, this is the third cut that the military's had to take, and dealing with that is not easy. I also appreciate what you said about Mr. Cole, specifically because he has an amendment that I want you to remember and accept as time comes on. I think it's an important one. If everyone does that, we'll all be great. I have two specific questions and then one general, maybe observation, if I could. Mr. Young, in this particular budget, I realize there has been a reduction of $48 million for Trident II. That's part of our nuclear triad modifications. And it has cited as a rocket motor contract saving. I'm just wondering if you could explain what the saving is indicated here, and if this stays in there, how do you anticipate this would impact the 2014 rocket motor quantities that would come up?
Now, you're specifically talking about the
D5?
the Trident motors.
Yeah.
We did not fund them in fiscal year 2014 in this bill. And the reason we did not was because we took the savings in FY13. And so the funding for 12 motors is covered by the savings in FY13. And so we are committed to a 12 motors a year production level.
All right, that's great to know because that keeps the momentum going as far as replacement and rejuvenation of that particular rocket motor, which is important to our defense that comes here.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to let Mr. Cole deal with the other question. I think you will, probably better than I, in the other specific. I just finished a book by Robert Kaplan called The Revenge of Geography. And in that, it said that a country gets the foreign policy it is willing to fund. The thing is, the foreign policy we fund is not done in the budget that deals with the State Department. It is in this particular budget. What we fund in this budget will determine what foreign policy we have, not just in the immediate future, but 10 and 15 years down the line, because of the lead time that is required for what is taking place in here. So I find this particular budget of extreme significance. He also said in there that, everyone keeps saying, well, the Cold War has ended. I liked in his concept of the problems of geography saying that the Cold War actually makes us less secure, having ended, in that it's not just the Russians and the Chinese who have not stopped their upgrades and modernization of their weaponry, but the demographics as well as the geography of Russia, which as a declining population with a large space and a lot of equipment makes them very dangerous, and China with a large demographic of a whole lot of men with less space and a lot of increasing technology makes them even more dangerous. And the Cold War rim military powers in the Cold War were basically militaries that had a great deal of geographical buffers, as well as militaries that were fairly traditional in that they spent as much time bringing in the harvests as they did dealing with military preparedness. But the technology has changed. In fact, the word he used was technological claustrophobia, which means those geographic buffers that they have no longer exist. So you have a situation with India and China, both of them competing for a naval presence in the Indian Ocean. India recognizing historically all the invasions that have come in India have come through Afghanistan, so they care about that. You have the countries of Iran, Turkey, and Egypt now as major players in the Middle East without the geographical buffer that they used to have. So the situation for them and the situation conversely for us is far more complex and far more critical and far more volatile than it actually was while the Cold War was going on. And what the United States needs is to be prepared for all of those occurrences. And that doesn't even talk about Mexico and South America, which is changing its demographics and changing its geography, which changes its relationship with us. So with that, I appreciate what you have done, because this is truly our foreign policy budget right here. And without this budget, without giving the potential for that, we could have a very brutal future that would be coming at us. So I appreciate your work for that. I appreciate your answering that specific. I appreciate what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to trying and somehow to bring some kind of comprehensive balance back into what we are trying to do with our military. Thank you, gentlemen. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields his time, and thank you very much. Gentleman of Massachusetts recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank both the chairman and the ranking member for being here and for your work on this bill. I think I have a very different view than Mr. Bishop about how we should pursue our foreign policy.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me. Jim, could I get you to talk a little louder?
Oh, okay.
When I was here Thursday for the canceled meeting, I was up and running, but I came down with a case of bronchitis, and it affected my ears, too.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you really want him to talk louder or not.
Yeah.
No, he was up close so I could hear him.
Okay, well, yeah. One of the things that worries me, and I think Mr. Bishop pointed this out in his comments, and when I read the additional views that Mr. Visklosky and Ms. Lowy submitted, it became clear that the bill ignores the Budget Control Act sequester cap on defense funding. And we can argue about, how much money we need in the defense budget and how much we don't need in the defense budget. But I just think it's curious that the majority here picks and chooses, how it's going to, when it's going to ignore sequestration to kind of suit its needs. And I point that out because I do think we just had a discussion on the THUD bill, and we have infrastructure in this country that is falling apart. I just remind my colleagues that we all talk about national defense. It means more than just the number of weapons we have. It means whether or not people have housing, whether or not people can safely drive on the streets, whether we have police and firefighters and first responders. It means good health care. It means a whole bunch of things. And so it bothers me when different budgets get treated differently. But putting that aside, Mr. Chairman, I might have missed it, but did you request an open rule?
I have never brought a defense bill to the floor other than an open rule.
Okay. Well, then I will support you in your effort to have an open rule on this, because I think it would seem awfully strange if we didn't. But in any event, I want to thank you both for being here. I don't want to get into a big philosophical argument here, but I got to tell you, I think we are investing so much in weapon systems that I don't even think we need anymore. We're investing so much overseas in these wars that I think ought to come to an end as quickly as possible, because there's no way we're going to win. I read article after article about how the government of Afghanistan takes our taxpayer money and hands it out in cash payments to its friends. I think that's an insult to the men and women who put their lives on the line at our request. And I think the sooner we can pull out of some of these conflicts, the better for our country and the better for our foreign policy, quite frankly. But thank you for being here.
Gentleman yields back his time. The chairman who's been spoken so much of today from Oklahoma is recognized.
Yeah, it's almost like my funeral today.
Don't be late to that one.
Well, first, I don't have a lot of specific questions, maybe one or two, because I did have the privilege of working on this committee, and I couldn't be more proud to be a very junior member of this committee. It is something I think if all the members of Congress and the public could watch each and every day, how bipartisan it is, how genuinely thoughtful the Republican and the Democratic members of that committee are, and how much they try to arrive at the right number. And Chairman Young, that's because of the example that you set for many years, but you've certainly been joined in that by your working partner, the gentleman from Indiana. It's just an extraordinarily fine group of people and well-run committee to be associated with. I don't want to get in a long debate, but maybe a word for picking and choosing would be called prioritizing. And I think that's what you gentlemen did here. It's interesting to me that you came very close to what the President asked for in terms of your overall dollars, but as is normal in the process, obviously the Congress will have some differences with the administration here or there, but you're pretty close. And at least the top line number to where the President was, a little bit beneath him, actually. So if you're overspending on defense, Mr. Chairman, the President must be even overspending more, because he requested a higher number than you came in at, but you're close. Given that, and you two may want to comment, I was surprised to see a veto threat on this bill. I can see it in other bills where we're coming in considerably lower, but when we're pretty close to what the President wants, and it's such a critical area, and it's actually the largest single part of the discretionary budget, I was pretty astonished that he would single it out for a potential veto threat, or his advisors would. And I'd like to get your reaction if you and gentlemen from Indiana care to give it to that threat.
Okay, let me ask you to say again what you want my reaction on.
Yeah, the president, even though you're pretty close to the president in terms of your overall number, he said, because he doesn't like other parts of the budget, he might veto this part of the budget. It seems to me, why would you link this part of the budget to other part when you're pretty close to agreement here? I guess I've always belonged to the school of thinking when you find something you broadly agree on, let's take that off the table and then move on to the areas where we disagree. But if we agree here broadly, it seems to me that the president be advised to work with the committee on this, and we can get to a bill that's pretty close to what he asked for, I think.
Risking responding to something you didn't say. As I explained, my ears are plugged up because of the bronchitis. On Thursday, when we were here for that session, I was in good shape. But you're talking about the dollars. If it were up to me, I would have provided a lot more money. Sequestration would not allow me to do that. As you know, we did the very best we could considering the sequestration number. There's a lot more that needs to be done. We are not modernized to the extent that we should be modernizing. I'm concerned about furloughs at the hospitals. The military hospitals should not be having furloughs because the kids that are out there that are hurt, that are sick, they don't take a furlough. They're sick. When they need a nurse, they need a nurse. When they need a doctor, they need a doctor. So there is more that we should be doing in that regard. What are we going to do with all of the equipment that is presently in Afghanistan? It's going to cost us a lot of money to bring it back, if we do bring it back. If we spend that money to bring it back, it takes it away from some other very essential responsibility. So if you think I'm really happy with this bill, I'm not. But I would tell you that it is the best we could do with the sequestration number that we had to deal with. And, that I've made that speech many times, and it goes a lot longer than that, but in the interest of this committee's work, I won't go any further, but I think you got an idea of how I feel about this whole thing.
Indeed, I do.
Mr. Cole, I might want to take all of the blame here because as ranking member on energy and water, I have engendered veto threats in the past myself, so I may just be bringing that to the table and imposing upon Chairman Young. In seriousness, I also think that the President's threat, and I've read the statement, gets back to the observations made by my friend Mr. McGovern, and that is the allocation within the committee. What I would say on behalf of the chairman and the members of the subcommittee, as you know, you were in the room, is the allocation we were given, we tried to do our very best. But I think the president's veto is predicated on how the allocation was made in the first instance.
Well, and I would hope we can come to a larger agreement, the point I've made repeatedly, that we can deal with that. And I think that gets down to differences of opinion, probably above everybody's pay grade in this room, about how you would distribute the cuts that are, because of sequestration written into the Budget Control Act. And that's the law of the land, so you got to deal with it somehow. You can't just ignore it, as our friends in the Senate seem to do. But I think that the two of you and the committee did the right thing here. I think you prioritized by defense first. You still had a lot of tough decisions to make. I think they were made in a bipartisan fashion. I think this bill is pretty close and will probably end up pretty close. We still have a lot of amendments to do to the total number that the President asked for. And so I would just hope that as the process works through, if we arrive at an area where we agree in defense with the Senate and we're pretty close, that the administration would not veto it because of its concerns in other parts of the budget. Let's take the areas we can agree and find common ground. I do have one additional point I want to make, and I'm not even going to ask you for a question because I think it'd be pretty unfair. This committee has not yet made an amendment in order that I have, which is to we're all worried about sequestration. We're all worried about the number of defense workers that we're furloughing. About 180,000 of those are not really affected by appropriations. They're paid out of the working capital fund. And if we're able to get that amendment in order, then I hope that those workers are kept, fully employed. There's no reason we're not saving any money. That's basically a money in, money out. The customer pays for it. So I wouldn't ask your opinion on that. I don't think that'd be fair to you. The amendment hadn't been made in order, and so whatever you guys do on the floor, fair enough. But if it is made in order, I just ask that you give it serious consideration.
Thank you.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back this time. Gentleman, Judge Hastings recognized. Yes, sir.
Chairman and Chairman Young and Ranking Member Visklosky, I certainly thank both of you. And I respect the fact that you have the bipartisan committee approach to our problems in this country, and I believe genuinely that you did the best that you could with what you had. It's what you had is what is troubling to me. Thank you. I'm sorry, Bill. And I, as most of us, read several newspapers a day. And today, in reading the Washington Post, I hearken back to my friend from Oklahoma's comments about priorities. I really was heartrended when I saw real evidence that Head Start programs closed in the article that was set forth. And one specifically was in the name of a person, certainly Mr. Visklosky and Mr. Young, and many of you here knew his name but didn't know him, but Whitney Young was at one time the executive director of the Urban League, and the facilities that operate in his name in New York were closed. Now, my priority may not be the same as many other persons, but boy, when you're talking about kids not having a shot at something because we made a bomb, then I guess my priorities are pure and simple, that I would prefer to do something to help the child than to make another bomb. Now, that does not ignore all of the priorities that you set forth and the things that you could not do, and the things that my friend from Utah mentioned with reference to Trident. I don't know that there has been a more serious advocate for a naval presence than myself, and I've had the good fortune of being here 20 of the years, and some of them either as ranking member or as chairman, that Bill Young has brought forth a defense appropriations measure under an open rule. And I respect the fact that we may be in difficult times. What I don't agree with is that we're 3 months in now without the Republicans having even appointed conferees with reference to the Budget Control Act. And that's where the administration's statement of policy comes into play. And I'd ask unanimous consent that it be offered into the record.
Without objection.
And they're always nuanced, all of these White Houses, Democrats and Republicans. And they leave themselves wiggle room all the time. And what it really says is, unless this bill passes the Congress in the context of an overall budget framework that supports our recovery and enables sufficient investments in education, infrastructure, innovation, and national security for our economy to compete in the future, the President's senior advisors would recommend that he veto H.R. 2397 and any other legislation that implements the House Republican budget framework. We then throw around and say that the President will veto it. the president's advisors would recommend that he veto it, and I'm not so sure that in each instance that a president, be it the one we have now or previous or those in the future, always follow their advisors. I've seen too much evidence where they did not. Interestingly enough, we haven't been involved in serious vetoes by any administration for a protracted period of time. Before I came to Congress, it used to be like almost every other month or two you pick up something and the president had vetoed something, and that just doesn't happen quite as much. But I do believe that we should have a conference on the budget, and I think that's where some of the recalcitrance is coming from. Nothing about this particular measure itself. I understand the dynamics at work, and just am not appreciative of the fact that we continue to be in the position of not going forward to conference. And I don't know why. I also don't believe that Chairman Rogers or Chairman Young or Ranking Member Visklosky would accept in a defense appropriations measure that not having an open rule could very well become precedent, and I don't think either of them would want to see that in light of past performance on this measure. And the reason I raise it so loudly is because there are very, very critical issues both these gentlemen may be privy to, certain other members of certain committees, the Intelligence Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, the Armed Services Committee. A lot of them may be privy to many of the things that need to be discussed because they have classified briefings. I've been in that position, but a lot of us don't have that benefit, and a lot of us have ideas regarding measures of some serious magnitude in this overall framework, and more specifically dealing with the recent revelations at NSA and Syria, and one of the largest looming problems that we have, and that is what transpires in Egypt and how we go about it in handling our foreign policy with reference to that gigantic problem that is developing in that area. And I, for one, would like to see members and hear members' views, and I hope that we will have an open rule. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman, George is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank both the chairman and the ranking member for being here. I had a quick question along the lines of sequestration. I mean, we had a choice. We could have gone down the road the Senate went down. We could have budgeted to a big number that we knew would not be the number at the end of the day if past performance is any indicator of future results. We weren't going to have a mechanism to replace sequester, and we could have abdicated all of those prioritizing decisions. In the 2.5 years I've been in Congress, we've been ruling by continuing resolution, making decisions by not making decisions. And so my question to the two of you all is, I would congratulate you on receiving the longest veto threat that I've seen in my 2.5 years on the Rules Committees. The administration certainly put a lot of effort into going line by line. I think that's because you all put a lot of effort going into line by line. Did we do the right thing trying to appropriate to something closer to a sequester top line number? Or if you had to do it all over again and you all got to make the rules, would you have budgeted to a 1048 number and allowed the administration to come back through, or OPM as the law requires, and make those changes in the absence of congressional input?
I don't understand the question you're asking. Are you saying that our bill is the sequestration level?
I'm saying your bill is below the non-sequestration number.
Below the administration's request.
That's right. Well, and below where we would be if Mr. McGovern and I had my way, and we found that mandatory spending package of bills that we could move forward tomorrow to replace the sequester, your DOD number would be a different number than it is today.
So are you, I do not understand the question you're asking. Are you asking, and I speak only for myself now, am I disappointed that the number is lower than the non-sequestration number asked by the administration?
Did we make a better use of your time? You all have put in an amazing amount of effort into this piece of legislation. A piece of legislation the President said in the context of everything else he'd veto, or his advisors would recommend that he veto if it showed up on his desk today. I don't think that was a waste of time. I think that was an incredibly important use of time. I think it is critically important that we move bills that reflect congressional priorities, bipartisan priorities, House priorities. We could either move that legislation in the context of a number that we know will be reduced as a function of math through the sequester process, or we can try to appropriate to a number that would be that sequestered number and reflect all of our priorities in the process.
Speaking for myself, I would not want to mark a bill to a proposed assumed sequestration level because I think it's irresponsible.
The number itself is irresponsible, understanding that it's the law of the land either way.
I think the law is irresponsible. I voted against the law that created sequestration in the first instance. So that has been my belief since I voted against it.
Recognizing that here in the House, we had great concern about the way sequestration was being implemented in the Defense Department. Went back to try to give the Defense Department more flexibility to make some of those decisions.
I would, in response to the gentleman's assertion, I do not believe it is our responsibility to give the Department of Defense a lot of discretion. Our responsibility is to look at the budget that the President has proposed to the United States Congress, and for the Congress to work its will on the administration's request. One of the ideas, supposedly, between sequestration was it would be so mindless and so bad, it would force Congress to do just that, and that is exactly what I hope the Congress does.
But that hasn't worked out quite the way we anticipated back in August of 2011.
I didn't vote for the bill.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I said earlier that sequestration complicated our job. It complicates the bookkeeping. It complicates how you're going to attend these values that we're trying to do. And as Mr. Visklosky said, we work with the President, we work with the Defense Department, we work with the Armed Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee, and we try to bring them all together in an appropriations bill, considering the fact that sequestration, whether you like it or not, and I don't like it, by the way, whether you like it or not, it is with us. This bill is $512.5 billion. That's $3.4 billion below the CBO estimate of the President's budget request. But it is approximately $28.1 billion above the estimated fiscal year 2013 sequestration level. Now, we're trying to balance these numbers out, and it is not easy. Sequestration has really confused it.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Now, there seems to be some confusion, Mr. Young, about exactly what you're requesting. In your interchange with my colleague, Mr. McGovern, it sounded like you were requesting a open rule for this. I know he thanked you for that. I'm looking at your letter, and in your letter it says you want this brought to the floor under a structured rule. So for the record, I'd just like you to clarify, are you seeking an open rule or a structured rule on this appropriations bill? For Mr. Young. What are you seeking? Again, in your conversation with Mr. McGovern, it sounded like you were, well, I think you said you were seeking an open rule. Oh, that's the full chair? So I guess the question is, as a subcommittee chair, what are you seeking? What kind of rule are you seeking on this bill?
Well, first of all, let me say, and I'll repeat it, I've never the Rules Committee has never given me other than an open rule. I will work with whatever this committee gives me. If it's an open rule, if it's a structured rule, whatever it is, I'll work with it. Now, what I have seen of over 150 some amendments, that smacks of open rule to me.
So you yourself support and would be fine with an open rule on this appropriations bill?
No, what I would say is that whatever this committee decides, I will work with it, and I will have no difficulty working with it.
Well, we appreciate the prerogative, of course, that this committee has. And by the way, this committee doesn't always give chairs and ranking members the exact rule they want, but we do like to ask what rule they want. So I think, to be clear, you'd be happy to work with us on an open rule. And I think that's very important because particularly when it comes to national security issues, and particularly on issues where many of our constituents and others have questioned our oversight ability because of our limited abilities in this area to exercise this oversight. Appropriations is the most critical area to exercise oversight of the executive. So I hope that your desire that you express for an open rule will come to pass. If so, I certainly look forward to supporting that on the floor of the House as well. And Mr. McCloskey, you also would be happy with an open rule for this bill? Great. Well, we do aim to make you happy, and so I hope that that's what we'll be doing in a few minutes, and I yield back.
Chairman yields back
Well,
his time.
Mr. Chairman, I got to be realistic about this whole thing about open rules and closed rules, structured rules. There are several amendments that I understand deal specifically with very classified information that cannot be discussed in an open session of the House of Representatives. So if those amendments were going to be considered, we'd have to close the House because they deal with very specific, classified matters.
Could I ask the chair for
I would not support any rule that would open those up to a wide open discussion on the floor.
Chairman Young, let me acknowledge not only what you have said, but what your advice has been to not only myself as chairman of the Rules Committee, but also other members of leadership who have advisedly been working for a long period of time on how we might accommodate not only the membership, but how we might accommodate a tradition in this House of Representatives. And I want to thank you very much for your comments. Gentleman from Colorado evidently had something else. The gentleman is recognized.
And with regard to, I think there's always sensitive issues before this House. And, of course, traditionally, as long as we're not putting in jeopardy our sources of intelligence or those who are working with our country, we still need to exercise our oversight in an open and transparent manner as possible. So hopefully there's room for discussion of these issues at the $20,000 foot level. Should we fund this program? Should we not? Frankly, most of our dirty laundry has been aired already by others. And to the extent we talk about it here, I think we're only talking about what has already been discussed in the free press. And I would remind members that when talking about sensitive topics, we should, and we can, point to arguments that have been made in the free press. We are, in fact, subject to classified briefings, and we should not reference specifics of those on the floor of the House. But I believe there's ample information available in the public domain that members on all sides of these arguments can point to when discussing them on the floor of the House.
Mr. Chairman,
The gentleman is recognized from Florida.
if I have to respond to some of the amendments that I have seen in an open session, it's not a fair fight, because there is information that I would be able to present in a closed session that I could not, in violation of my commitment to maintain our national security. And I tell Mr. Polis that the only real argument that my wife and I ever have is she wants to know what I know. And I tell her, I can't tell you what I know. And those things are better held in executive session.
Mr. Chairman, I want to reiterate what you have stated, and there seems to be as always, a desire of this body to make sure that we're open and transparent with each other. I would say this to my colleagues on this committee. There has been a lot of dialogue about some of the ideas which you have presented to us today, which the leadership committee of the Republican Party, the majority party, have attempted to talk with members in an open process to try and make sure we were talking about the same ideas that they had. And what I would suggest to you is you have very adequately represented the advice you have given to this member as chairman of the Rules Committee and other members of leadership, and we will, as you know, work through very carefully the ideas that come forth, and we will do the very best we can. I would tell the gentleman from Colorado that the rule that we will present this evening hopefully will mirror that well-thought-out process of a balance between the needs of this committee, the membership on the floor, and any one in particular member who has a strong opinion. I respect all three of those, and it's hard putting them together.
Mr. Chairman, may I make an observation for the record?
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
I just want to, for the record, note that my good friend, the chairman, keeps secrets from his lovely wife, Beverly, at considerable risk to himself, and it shows his commitment to the security of the country to put himself that much at risk. So with that, I yield back, and I thank my friend.
I have heard this argument before. My father served, as we all know, as the director of the FBI, and my mother, I'm sure, wished to have conversation with him often, and perhaps I did as a son. And there was a very wide line there. What I'm trying to suggest to the membership of this body who advocates, I believe, respectfully and strongly, that we will try and consider the sides which are necessary, and that is national security, the availability of information that can effectively be given to members, to the strong ideas that some of our members do have about not just right and wrong and good and bad, but their role as an effective legislator. And I'm trying to mirror all of these together and give some balance. And so I thank the gentleman for, when he could have been quiet about his advice to me, he chose to speak up. And I want to thank the gentleman from Florida for accepting part of the recognition that this is a difficult task, and I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Colorado yields his time. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nugent's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, my apologies for being late. I couldn't flap my arms fast enough, I guess, to get here.
Apologies accepted. We're delighted that the gentleman's here.
And I really do appreciate both of you. I wish I could have been here for your testimony, but Chairman Young, you have been an advocate and a stalwart as it relates to our national security and defense. You have served this nation and your district, but this nation with great distinction. And it really is a pleasure, to be from the same state that you are and represent, but more importantly, in regards to your dedication to our men and women that carry the flag and protect us at great risk to themselves. And a lot of folks, only 1% of this nation serves. And that burden is placed upon an all-volunteer force who needs needs us having their back and making sure that they have the equipment, the training, the skills necessary to win in battle if called upon. And that's not something that I don't think that we should take for granted, because it doesn't happen without great expense. And so I really don't have any questions. I just want to thank both of you for your service as appropriators in making sure that our men and women have everything that they need. And I know this is an extremely tough time with sequestration that's facing our military, but everything that you do makes a difference. And so I do appreciate it and having 3 sons that currently serve, it means an awful lot to a parent to know that there's somebody out there looking out for their backs. And so thank you very much.
I appreciate the gentleman yields back. I appreciate the comments, and I will say this, that I do know that he meant his comments would apply to both of you in your strong leadership for members of our military, the sons and daughters of not just the members that are on this committee and of this body, but for so many people back home who do trust the wisdom and the ability to work together on behalf of the United States in our best interest. And I thank the gentleman for his comments. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Webster, is recognized. The gentleman seeks no recognition. The chairwoman from Florida is recognized.
To thank the gentleman, and most especially our esteemed Florida colleague, for his many years of leadership. Thank you, Mr. Young.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman, Dr. Burgess, is recognized. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Young, you referenced the cost of bringing things home from Afghanistan, and I just wondered if you had, and with your experience of having gone through that in 2011 in Iraq, do you have an idea as to the cost of that redeployment?
I can't hear what he said.
He wants to know how much we're going to spend on the retrofit from Afghanistan.
Yeah, the question was, do you
I don't think I can give you the answer to that yet. And the reason is that we don't know whether we're going to be resetting any or all of that equipment, whether we're going to be leaving it in Afghanistan for them to use, or whether we're going to send it to some other country that has needs of that type of equipment. I just don't know the answer to that yet.
But you did have the experience with Iraq, and with that experience, did that dollar amount turn out to be more than you thought, less than you thought, about what you had budgeted?
Well, there is flexibility in the overseas contingency operations that will allow for the administration to make that decision. And they do have transfer authority, and they could use it for that purpose.
So are we talking about tens of billions of dollars, billions of dollars? Do we have an idea as to the dollar amount?
There's $85.8 billion in the overseas contingency operations account.
So all of that could be tapped in the transfer. Wow. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. I want to thank both of you very much. These are interesting times in which we live. I don't need to impress upon anybody on this committee about the commitment that both of you have made to the men and women of the United States military, to the success of this great nation, to protecting this great nation. And as you bring forth in your careers of service to this nation, we respect and appreciate your words, your deeds, and your actions that you make on behalf of these very important people that are called heroes of our nation. We are a free nation because of the United States military, the men and women who fight today and who have given their lives and support to this great nation in the past. It is my hope that we will honor them appropriately as we move forward. I want to thank both of you for being here, and you're both excused. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the committee. We appreciate you.
Yes, sir. I now will impanel the next group, and I will call upon 5 members and would recognize them at this time. The gentleman, Mr. Fleming, the gentleman, Mr. Amash, the gentleman, Mr. Gibson, the gentleman, Mr. Welsh, and the gentleman, Mr. Bresendine. And I would ask that if there are other members that are here, I would ask that they would feel free to go vote. We are going to have 2 votes in this series, and I would ask that we would notify the members of the committee that if they would go vote, come back. That seems to give us some reprieve for time. I know we want to hear the membership of this committee. I would encourage a gentleman to not do that. I would encourage a gentleman to stay. I tried my best to get him to go a couple of minutes ago, but I would go ahead and I will be referring. That'd be fine if the gentleman wants to go. That's his business. But we're going to move through this this group right now, and I would offer support as I do to each member that's here. Thank you for taking time to be before us today. Your ideas are very important, and the chance that you have to update us on important activities, amendments that you would wish to be made in order are very important. I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma for joining us. With that said, anything you have in writing without objection will be entered into the record. The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized at this time. Please remember that the microphone needs to be turned on and pointed at you, and I thank the gentleman from Vermont very much for his assistance. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the committee as a whole. You guys are up here late at night, and I just appreciate so much what you go through, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your robust leadership that you show in doing this, so thank you. I'm pleased to join colleagues Representative Forbes, Bridenstine, Jim, and Jim Jordan, Joe Pitts, James Langford, in offering this amendment that would hold DOD to current accepted DOD policy when appointing military chaplains. In a strong bipartisan fashion, Congress has voted twice in the last 6 weeks to affirm the spiritual role of a chaplain within the U.S. military. On June 5th, the House Armed Services Committee, by a vote of 43-18, defeated an amendment that would have allowed for atheist chaplains. The full House defeated a similar amendment on June 14th by a vote of 274-150. Despite these recent votes, we've heard from credible sources that the military, the Navy in particular, is considering the possibility of appointing an atheist chaplain, completely bypassing Congress, the voice of the people, and current DOD standards. A chaplain, by definition, is a person who ministers spirituality, who ministers on the basis of a higher power, but is also assigned to a secular organization, such as the military. The very nature of the word chaplain suggests that the individual possesses a belief in God and desire to be a conduit of God's truth to others. Atheists reject the very existence of God, and thus atheist chaplains is a nonsense phrase. It's an oxymoron, Mr. Chairman. Military chaplains have a duty to faithfully serve all service members, regardless of whether the individual shares the chaplain's faith. Chaplains have and will continue to serve with respect any service member, religious, atheist, or agnostic alike, who comes to them providing these services with any resources that they might need in their service to our nation. The guidelines for obtaining chaplains for a denomination are outlined in DOD Instruction 1304.28 and require that any endorsing agent be an organization whose primary function is to, quote, perform religious ministries to a non-military law constituency, end quote, and who holds tax-exempt status as a church. All chaplains must be endorsed by a, quote, qualified religious organization, end quote, verifying that the individual is a qualified, quote, religious military professional, RMP. RMPs are required to support the free exercise of religion by all members of the military and their families. It would be difficult for an atheist chaplain to receive an endorsement without dismantling the chaplaincy and without making significant changes to DOD's current policy in regulating chaplain opponents. I just would say in summary, Mr. Chairman, that there are many things wrong with, first of all, the administration, again, trying to do an end run around Congress who reflects the will of the people. We've seen it with various other things, such as a carbon tax. You see how this was utterly destroyed in Congress itself, and yet the administration wants to do a bypass, and in doing so, violate a number of rules and regulations that are already in place. It says that just not anybody can be a chaplain. There are some very important criteria. So with that, I would ask for the committee's support in accepting this amendment.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, did you intend to speak on this amendment also?
Not this one specifically, no, sir.
Thank you very much. Okay. Mr. Welsh, you're recognized.
Gibson, and I'm here on two amendments, one that he and I are co-sponsoring. And I'll speak briefly and then turn it over to my colleague Chris. There's a question about arming Syrian rebels. It's a very serious question. There's two aspects to it that are quite important. One is the policy. Should we arm the rebels? Is that a wise policy? Small arms, will that make a difference? Can we have confidence that when the Syrian rebels are divided, some beheading others, that those arms will actually get to who we think they should and stay in those hands? Very risky policy. But there's a second question. And the second question is, does Congress play a role? Or are we a passive bystander? This is a significant military action if we're explicitly taking sides in a civil war. We're choosing that we want to bring down Assad. That may be a good choice. But should Congress be involved in the debate, in the discussion, and vote yes or no on making that commitment? That's the amendment. Chris is the principal sponsor. I'm his lead co-sponsor on the Democratic side. And I'll let him speak to that if I could, and then come back to my second amendment.
Thank you very much, gentleman from New York's recognized.
I thank my friend from Vermont, and it's great to be back with the committee again, and really just want to endorse what Peter just said, that, this is a matter where the American people are counting on us, that we're going to express the will of our constituents. Think about it this way. If another country was to give arms to a rebel group with the express purpose of attacking us, we would view that as an act of war. And the founders were very clear on that who speaks when it comes to the matter of war and peace? Who speaks when it comes to declaring war, authorizing force? And that's us. So I feel very strongly that there should be a vote. And in fact, even beyond this great committee and this appropriations bill, this should be a matter of a resolution brought to the floor. But in the absence of that, and I've been calling for that, in the absence of that, this amendment is necessary. And I will tell you, as somebody who served in the military for many years, my military judgment is what is being proposed will not succeed. You talk about arming these rebels, a lot of questions immediately come to the fore as to efficacy. But I will tell you that, providing small arms weaponry, like we're talking about doing, it is not going to resolve this matter. It will only exacerbate it. And we will be responsible for a civil war. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. And, certainly Peter and I share a concern. The humanitarian situation on the ground is very concerning. I endorse the diplomatic efforts that have been going on to date. I think we can do more on that. But with regard to arming rebels, and not only arming rebels, I oppose arming rebels, but also I oppose military action. So our amendment makes it clear that before that can happen, there has to be a vote in the Congress. And I hope my colleagues will support it. I'll yield back to Peter.
Appreciate the comments, gentleman. From,
my second amendment, if I could do that, Mr.
Gentleman
Chairman.
be recognized.
It's Amendment 176, and this would prohibit American taxpayer funds from being used to pay to the Afghan government custom fees for the transportation of U.S. military equipment across the borders to return to the U.S. It's reported that the Afghan government is not letting us take our material that we've had for many years for the benefit of the Afghan people, without paying a $1,000 per container fee for every container that leaves. So far, the Afghan government is assessing $70 million in, quote, fines against the American government. It's extraordinarily disruptive and ultimately very expensive. If, in fact, we have to use military air transport to bring our material home, that could cost hundreds of millions, if not billions, of additional dollars. This is just a continuation of a stick-up mentality by the Afghan government. The point of this amendment is, one, it's totally unacceptable. Number two, this will give our military much more strength when they're resisting the overreaching by the Afghan government. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate the gentleman's amendment, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
If the gentleman would choose to go vote, I would encourage that, and then please come back. You've not been excused from the hearing. Thank you very much. And I would encourage the gentleman from Louisiana to do the same. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Bridenstine, is recognized.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is number 127. It's very simple, seemingly not controversial. It's got bipartisan support, bipartisan sponsorship. It basically shifts priorities from lower priority, or shifts money from lower priority activities to higher priority activities. Specifically, it reduces the defense media activity by $11 million and increases the National Guard State Partnership Program by $10 million. This is, I'll give you an example of media activity. Would include the Pentagon channel. It would include other entertainment channels for the Department of Defense, which can be, those roles can be filled in other ways. And it pluses up a very important program for our national security interests, specifically the National Guard State Partnership Program, and I'll give some quick examples. The state I'm from, the state of Oklahoma, we have a partnership program with Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan fights alongside the United States in Afghanistan. And the state partnership program has enabled our National Guard from Oklahoma to go over there and provide support in training, and not just in training in warfare, but also training in technology, subject matter expert exchanges, and in fact embedding exchanges where they have folks in our military, we have folks embedding in their military to create the strongest partnership possible so that when we do go to war, we in fact are sharing the risk, we're sharing the burden, we're sharing the cost, and we're building partner capacity with our partners and allies around the world. Oklahoma is one example with Azerbaijan. Another example, of course, Texas. National Guard, very instrumental in 1993 in helping the Czech Republic establish a military that was under civilian control, and also do all the reforms required as the Czech Republic tried to separate itself from the former Soviet Union. This is a pretty simple amendment. It's, again, reducing the defense military activity by $11 million and increasing the National Guard State Partnership Program by about $10 million. Other things of note, this has been voted on within the House Armed Services Committee. It was voted on and it passed the House Armed Services Committee. It was voted on the full floor. And all this does is it shifts the money now for accelerating this program that is in the national security interests of our country.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't even notice the seamless transition. We can turn to questions for these members. The gentleman from Georgia, you have questions? Mr. McGovern, do you have questions?
Well, thank you for testifying. I hope that all your amendments are made in order. But I just want to speak of two of them. Mr. Welsh, your amendment on the taxation that we're being assessed to take our equipment out of Afghanistan. We have been ripped off by that government time and time again. It is one of the most corrupt governments in the world, and yet, we continue to get sucked into, dumping more and more of our resources into that war. And this is a war that we're not even paying for. We're borrowing all the money. So I think enough is enough, and I hope that we have a debate. And on the Syria amendment that Mr. Gibson and you are offering, I also strongly agree that the Congress needs to assert its proper role in discussions about whether we're going to arm, rebel groups, or whether we're going to use military action in other countries. We go to war under vague authorizations, and we don't hold the administration accountable, whether it's the Bush administration or the Obama administration. Congress ought to have a debate. And sometimes during debate, sometimes you expose bad policies, and people begin to reassess and say, maybe we shouldn't do this. Sometimes, in debates, the other side's position is strengthened. Debate is not something we should shy away from, especially when we're talking about, sending U.S. military equipment or potential U.S. troops to a situation that I haven't heard one analyst tell me how you get to a happy ending there. How arming the rebels is going to do anything but create more war. And in fact, most of these guys that would be arming don't like us. So it seems that this is an appropriate thing to have a debate on, and I hope that the amendments are made in order.
Well, I thank the gentleman. I just want to make one point of clarification, too, that there's a story breaking in the last hour or two that that I guess the Intelligence Oversight Committees now are removing their objections, and so they're ready to support the President's plan to arm the rebels. And, you know, I go back to that point again. I mean, look, I appreciate everyone's opinion on this in our entire body, and I need to listen to everyone. But, you know, my constituents, and Peter and I feel strongly about this, we expect that there's going to be a debate and a vote on this, not just in intelligence committees, but there's going to be a vote here on whether or not this is the expressed will of the American people by way of their representatives.
Thank you. We'll continue on with the questions. There still is 150 who have yet to vote, so you got a second here. Mr. Nugent.
Well, I want to thank Mr. Walsh and Colonel Gibson for your amendment in particular. I'm real disturbed. I saw that same article that came out that said the intelligence community, at least the intelligence committee, is giving their tacit approval or blessing to provide arms. I think it's a terrible mistake. Well, I don't think I can say it in a polite manner. It's a stupid idea. Because at the end of the day, and I think Mr. McGovern hit it, a lot of these people don't like us, and even the ones that probably like us a little bit, after we give them the weapons, they probably won't like us after that. If we've learned anything in Libya in regards to where weapons have wound up, they're not with our friends. You know, we're going to, and Colonel Gibson was my older son's brigade commander in the 82nd Airborne. And I'm sure that you never thought that this body would provide arms that could potentially be used against our own sons and daughters. If we've learned anything from history, we should know this is just a terribly flawed, bad idea. Everything that I hear from those who are supposedly in the know, they say the exact same thing. They have no idea who these folks are. They know varying degrees as to who are the bad guys, but none of them are clean hands. And so for this country to, I don't have a problem with humanitarian aid. You know, listen, we want to help people that need the help that are innocent bystanders to this. But we certainly shouldn't be sending weapons to those that could be used against us at some future conflict. And I will tell you in the most strongest terms that I would oppose ever sending any of our boys or girls over to fight in any way, whether it's in the air or on the ground, to intervene in Syria, because it is a losing proposition. And I don't know what everybody's thinking to think that there's going to be a positive outcome with this. Well, I feel sorry for the people in Syria. We didn't create this, but we sure as hell are going to add to it if we provide weapons. And, Mr. Chairman, I don't know what else to say. I really don't have any questions. I just had to get that off my chest because, once again, having kids serving, I want to make sure that we protect them. And you don't protect them by handing the bad guys, potential bad guys, that we could face in the future, weapons to kill our own. It absolutely makes no sense. And so with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Have you two voted? Have you voted already? Okay, Mr. Bridenstine will be coming back here, so since you voted, the rest of you can filibuster away. Mr. Hastings?
Mr. Chairman, I choose not to filibuster.
Bless you.
Ask him not to filibuster.
The Lord will bless you for that. Mr. Webster, do you have questions?
You know, I had something for Mr. Fleming. I don't know if he's coming back. Do you know if Mr. Fleming's coming back after votes? I can talk about it. I also want to thank Mr. Gibson for I think I would hope that he would lend his considerable talents to a more worthy cause than on the ESEA bill, and I'm glad to see he is, so I greatly appreciate that. I look forward to debating his amendment. Hopefully it'll be made in order. With regard to Mr. Fleming's amendment, I was the original author of an amendment that would allow humanist chaplains, received 150 votes on the floor of the House. This amendment is the wrong way to go about it. I would call upon my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to oppose it. Frankly, this would even prevent the military from having the flexibility that it needs on the personnel side to have a chaplaincy that can minister to the spiritual needs of the men and women who serve. About 20% of our men and women who serve are non-believers, identify as non-believers. Just because you're a non-believer doesn't mean you have the same existential questions as everybody else. What's the meaning of life? How do I justify the use of force and what I do, et cetera? The same types of questions that our men and women of faith deal with. And frankly, the military needs to be able to maintain the flexibility to have a chaplaincy that meets the needs of the men and women who serve. Many universities have humanist chaplaincies. And I think it might very well be a step the military wants to take. So to somehow lock in a 2004 DOD instruction would really be counterproductive in terms of affording the military the flexibility that it needs to provide spiritual support for the men and women who serve. So if it's allowed, I'll be debating Mr. Fleming on the floor. I'd hope to question him here about it. If he returns, Mr. Chair, I would ask for some time again, if you don't mind, but other than that, I will yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back his time. In response to the gentleman, Dr. Fleming will arrive. The doctor is in the house and will make himself available. And gentlemen, I would like to recognize him again for the purpose that he has.
And I apologize for referring to him as Mr. Fleming. I have great respect. My father has a PhD, so.
I answer by many names. That's just one. It doesn't matter to me.
So again, I was the original author of the amendment along with Mr. Andrews on the Defense Authorization Act, and the will of the House, I think, and I certainly understand the argument, is to give the discretion essentially to the military rather than specify in the authorizing statute with regard to what kind of chaplaincies should be provided. In your amendment, however, you restrict the military. You're effectively not allowing them, even if they choose to allow for humanist chaplains to be ordained. I would point out that we already allow non-theistic chaplains, Buddhist chaplains. It's a non-theistic faith. We have Buddhist chaplains. They don't believe in a god or gods. And we also have chaplains, perhaps of the Unitarian faith, that might indeed also openly profess no faith in God. It's a matter of discretion in that particular faith tradition. So I would ask, again, with more than 20% of the military that identifies as non-believers, why would we not, again, obviously with regard to quality, the military would have its criteria. Why not ordain humanist chaplains just as many universities and other institutions and hospitals have?
Yeah. First of all, I would strongly take issue that Buddhism, Unitarian Church, you may have mentioned another, are non-theistic. They're all theistic.
Buddhism is a non-theistic faith. Buddha is not a god or gods. They don't have god or gods in Buddhism.
Yeah, they actually do. There's also recognized Wiccans. I don't know what god they
believe in God. So we're talking about, again, a situation here. Humanists don't believe in God. Or gods. They don't believe in a god or gods. But that does not mean they don't have the same existential questions of what is the meaning of life, how do I justify the use of force, the same types of things that our members of other faiths want to consult a chaplain about, so might they.
Well, again, I would respond by saying that, and again, apart from our disagreement, all of the current chaplains represent organizations that do worship in one way or another a god or gods. In the case of what is the definition of chaplain, and I'm sure you've heard me say this, chaplain is someone who serves the faith, who is a minister of the faith, in a belief of a god or gods, a deity, a higher power, if you will, that's associated or attached to a secular organization. Now, by definition, an atheist is secular. He's non-theistic. He doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in a church. And as such, what you're really doing is attaching someone who is, in effect, not a minister of the faith to a secular organization. That's not the definition of a chaplain. But it goes further than that, as you heard me say.
Well, to be clear, how do you explain that there already are humanist chaplains at hospitals and universities across our country? Are you saying they are incorrect in allowing humanist chaplains to operate?
Well, if the gentleman will...
Including federally funded institutions.
Yeah, provide me the data on that. I've never heard of that. I'll be happy to review that.
If this is allowed on the floor, I'd be happy to.
Again, we're dealing with DOD policy and rules, and it's very clear that to be a chaplain, you have to have a sponsoring agency, organization, that is a recognized faith, There is none for atheism, humanist, at least not by DOD. So I would say to you that, again, it's an oxymoron. It makes no sense. We have plenty of secular counselors in the military for those who don't want a chaplain, for those who don't want somebody who believes in God or a God. That includes marriage counselors, social workers, physicians, psychiatrists, clinical psychologists. I was in the Navy, I know, and in terms of what your relationship is and what you have to disclose to commanding officers, it's essentially the same for chaplains as it is for healthcare workers.
Well, we're claiming the time. I mean, it is different with regard to some stigma that can be attached to talking to mental health workers. In addition, it's a question of what's being asked. When somebody, the type of issues that people want to discuss with chaplains regard meaning of life, these deeper issues, the moral complexities they face, these are not medical issues. These are spiritual issues, hence the role of the chaplaincy, which I strongly support. But it's a role that should be broad enough to minister to the needs of the 23% of the military who identify as non-believers.
Well,
and I think we're also debating if this is allowed, we'll continue this discussion on the floor. I do want to respect your time, so I'll give you the chance to say.
Yeah, if the gentleman will yield another moment, I would say to you that, again, psychiatrists, social workers, family physicians like myself, we counsel all the time outside of medical issues. But medical issues are very important. And again, a gentleman probably has heard me say that the last thing in the world I want to see is a young soldier dying in a hospital someplace near the front, way away from all the different chaplains that may be available, just the one chaplain that's assigned to that unit. And he or she is asking, well, what happens to me after I die? What happens to my soul? And you've got a chaplain who doesn't believe in a deity.
Reclaiming my time, as the gentleman knows, all the chaplains, including if they are humanist chaplains, they would be able to minister to the needs of all soldiers. If the only person with you in the trench is a Muslim chaplain, is a Buddhist chaplain, is a Hindu chaplain, they are trained to cater to the needs of Christians, as would any atheist chaplain. So just to be clear, that's the case.
If the gentleman would yell, that's precisely the point. Atheists not only don't believe in God, but they believe in removing God. They believe that it's a superstition.
Well, I mean, is that any more noxious to Christians than Hindus who might believe in many gods that have physical form? I mean, I'm not a Christian, so I can't say, but I mean, all of these are non-Christian beliefs, and yet chaplains who represent the full diversity of faith need to minister to anybody who's in the field.
Again, if the gentleman would yell, but they have one thing in common. They believe in a higher power. They believe in the supernatural. And they do work among themselves to be sure and respect each other's specific religious views.
Well, I would respectfully disagree. If this is advanced to the floor, I'll be happy to provide you information about the increasing number of universities and hospitals of humanist chaplains, as well as many of our European allies and their military now offer this as well. We'll be able to have a full discussion on the floor of the House. Again, this would prevent the military from offering it if the generals and the chaplaincy even sought to do this. I don't think we should micromanage the military in that way. If they choose to move this direction, I'll be happy to yield back.
Thank you. All right, I lost count where we were. Ms. Russ-Lathan, did you have any chance to ask questions? The gentlelady from Florida have any questions for this group?
No, I'm just caught up with the debate about incredible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No.
Okay. Ms. Slaughter, we appreciate you joining us. Do you want to join in with this group?
Join in with them?
Yes.
I don't know what side they're on.
Mr. Chairman,
neither do we. Okay.
Could I haven't voted the second vote. May I be?
You may be done forever. Just hold on a second.
Okay.
Anyone else that has any questions for this panel? With that, we appreciate.
I just want to thank Dr. Fleming because I think you're on the mark. I take it. I understand different ideas. But it's really absurd to me that you would call an atheist a chaplain. So I just want to thank you so very much.
All right. We do have, you need to go take your second vote, Mr. Fleming. You have taken your second votes?
I've taken my vote.
Okay. Mr. Burgess, do you have questions for the three who are remaining who have actually voted twice?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized.
And I'm so glad, Mr. Gibson, that you came back because I was going to find myself in the uncomfortable position of having to agree with Mr. Welch in your absence. But I want to thank both of you for bringing the Syria amendment to the committee, and we do need an opportunity to debate this, and I hope it is made in order. In fact, really won't do it justice in the time that we have available, but it is an important concept and one that I think needs to be heard on the House floor. Mr. Gibson, I'm absolutely in support of your concept of bringing a separate resolution to the House. And Mr. Welch, you heard my other comments to Mr. Young on the redeployment of material out of Afghanistan, and I think your amendment dealing with the levy that is being put on that ground transport is absolutely appropriate, and I hope the committee will make that in order as well, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you. With that, we want to appreciate you giving your testimony. This has been a very disjointed way of doing it and not the norm. And for people who are anal retentive like I am, this is really a difficult way to do it, but we thank you for being here. You're now dismissed.
Thank you.
We'd like to ask another panel to come up. Mr. Amash, who are here, Mr. Rourke.
Mr. Chairman, maybe it would be better to use the word fastidious.
It would be, yes. Unfortunately, you're dealing with me. Oh, Mr. Mulvaney, yes? And do I see any other member that's out there? Okay. Mr. Scalise, I think you came right in time to join us at the table. Oh. And the chairman is back as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the gentleman from Utah. He needs to hustle if he's going to make the vote. And I would assume that every member that's within my site has also voted appropriately, and I want to thank you very much. Mr. Mulvaney, thank you for taking time to give us a chance to get this done. I know you've been here for quite some time. Mr. Amash, I know you have been here for quite some time. And Mr. Scalise, I know you just got in because you slid in here, but I'm delighted. On behalf of the committee, we want to thank each of you for taking time to be before us. Your thoughts and ideas are very important. You've been spoken of several times, Mr. Amash. Some of it's been very favorable. The chance for you to be here is important to us. Without objection, anything you have in writing that you'd like to enter into the record, we would encourage that to be done. The last part is, but to welcome, I think you've been up here once before, so you know the rules of the game are you have to stick around till I excuse you. But I think we're now done with all of our votes, and I'm delighted that you're here. The gentleman from Louisiana, if he will be recognized, please remember he needs to turn on the microphone and speak into it. Gentleman is recognized at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Rules Committee. Appreciate it. Let me present this amendment. Deals with the funding and the contracts that are in place right now for non-petroleum-based fuels that the Department of Defense acquires. As we've seen over the last few years, the Department of Defense has experimented, done R&D and other things with renewable fuels. The problem is, as we're living in this post-sequester world, we've seen that these renewable fuels still are not competitive with traditional fuels. And when you have, for example, the Blue Angels being grounded because of sequestration, and yet a DOD contract was just let to purchase renewable fuel at $59 a gallon when the equivalent petroleum-based fuel is $3.73 per gallon, it just doesn't seem to make sense that we're spending tens of millions of dollars extra above market rates for fuel when we are doing things like grounding the Blue Angels and compromising, in some cases, some of our service members in the field. So this would save tens of millions of dollars for something that we just cannot afford to do, especially in a post-sequester world, and I'd encourage the committee to approve it through the process and be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Scalise, thank you very much. I was unaware of that, and I appreciate you sticking around for a few minutes to give us an opportunity to ask more questions about that. Gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, is recognized, and we're delighted that you're here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me. Again, I apologize to my colleagues for turning my back to some of you. Back on the National Defense Authorization Act, Mr. Van Hollen and I offered a bipartisan amendment that sought to take the OCO funding for next year down to the level that the President and the Pentagon had requested. It was roughly $85 million higher, $85 billion higher in the NDAA that the Pentagon had asked for. We've come back to you now with that amendment with some small changes to it. Importantly, we've added some more bipartisan co-sponsors. Mr. Murphy of Florida, Mr. Kaufman also joined us in this amendment this time around. There was some discussion last time as to whether or not the reduction in the OCO that we had proposed, would negatively impact the National Guard. We contend to this day that it did not, but we have made that small change to this amendment. So what this amendment does is bring OCO back down to what the Pentagon had asked for, but for the money that was in question regarding the National Guard. So the actual reduction is roughly $80 billion to the OCO. I'll be happy to answer any questions after that.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the members of the committee. Speaking on Lamborn O'Rourke Barrow 108, which would exempt the Department of Defense, their entire civilian workforce from furloughs. This is on the heels of over 650,000 Department of Defense civilian employees being furloughed. 11,000 of them are in my district in El Paso, Texas, and serve at Fort Bliss. With the amount of money that has been authorized and will likely be appropriated, I think it's unnecessary to continue these furloughs. This amendment will allow the House to go on record in making it clear to the Department of Defense that across-the-board furloughs are unacceptable and that we want the Department to take a more measured and efficient approach to dealing with budget cuts. I've spoken with the Congressional Budget Office, and they've informed me that this amendment would not change CBO's cost estimate of the bill. And then briefly, I would like to talk on O'Rourke 62, which would strike the Section 8058 so that Department of Defense can repair and maintain military family housing units. Again, using Fort Bliss as an example, there are nearly 4,000 homes in Fort Bliss with a 95% occupancy rate, with 5% of the homes constantly in the turn process or temporarily vacant. As a result of this growth, nationwide, the Army will spend $305 million on new family housing construction between July 11 and February of 2016, and millions more on the repair and maintenance of existing military housing. The numbers I cited are just a small snippet of the military's larger budgetary responsibilities. In times of austere budgets, we should look to alternative solutions, such as my amendment that would provide added flexibility for the military in caring for its soldiers and families. And lastly, I've spoken with the CBO, and they've informed me that this amendment would not change the CBO's cost estimate of the bill. Thank you. Yield back.
The gentleman from Michigan's right.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you very much for allowing me to testify briefly on my bipartisan amendment. I'm here on behalf of the people I represent. At town halls and meetings throughout my district, the people have made it abundantly clear that they do not approve of the indiscriminate collection of their records, including telephone records, by the NSA. No doubt you've experienced the same thing in your districts. This amendment simply allows the voice of the people through their elected representatives to be heard. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all four of you being here. Mr. Marsh, if you could please describe your amendment.
Sure. It basically requires a FISA court order to include a statement essentially indicating that it limits the collection of any records to those records that pertain to a person who is under investigation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scalise, the numbers that you spoke about with the fuel are stunning. Did the military begin doing this this year, last year? How much of their fuel budget is included in there? And is this something that was done by administrative action? Or had Congress previously stated that this would be the policy?
It's been done over years. We've dug around and tried to find out cumulative numbers, and they haven't gotten anything like that to us, but we have gotten a number of specific contracts that DOD is engaged in. And just as an example, in 2012, there was an MOU between the Department of Navy, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Energy, where each of those three agencies would spend $170 million to help develop production in the biofuels industry. And again, whether or not it makes sense to do it, I'm all for renewable energy, but should the Department of Defense be spending $170 million to develop a biofuels industry? That's something that definitely the private sector is working on and should continue to work on. If any agency should be solely focused on that, it should be the Department of Energy. But why the Navy is spending $170 million to build up a biofuels industry, again, in post-sequester, where our generals are telling us they don't have the tools they need today because of sequester, should there be an MOU that Navy has to spend $170 million on that one contract to develop a biofuels industry when there are clearly parts of their main core mission that they're not meeting right now?
It's very disturbing to me, and I thank you for bringing that forward to the committee. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Rourke. I've got considerable sympathy with your amendment. I have about double the number of defense workers you have. So a couple of questions. One, do you have any offset in your amendment for the projected savings? And two, is the amendment based on the idea that, and I hope this comes about, that there's some larger agreement that we can avoid the sequester cuts because they are written into law?
The answer to your first question is that I think, simply gives the Department of Defense explicitly the discretion to allocate its assets more wisely. And those civilian employees, in our case, who are treating the wounded warriors at William Beaumont Army Medical Hospital or are supporting our troops who are returning home at Fort Bliss, allows them to do their jobs and ensures that we're not undermining our military preparedness, nor are we hurting and negatively affecting those soldiers who are coming back. And the answer to your second question is no. It's not part of or an anticipation of a larger deal to avoid the sequester.
So just to be clear so I understand, so the assumption would be, you know, if they've got to make those cuts, they just find other areas, but these would be exempt. Is that it?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman very much. Gentlewoman from New York is recognized. Gentleman yields back the time. Gentleman from Georgia recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all of you being here and have great sympathy for all of the amendments that you've brought forward. Let me ask the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney. I had the great pleasure of working with him on the authorization language that he proposed earlier this year with the ranking member of the Budget Committee. Appreciate him coming back in even bigger co-sponsor fashion to do that again this time. Could you walk me through those numbers one more time, the difference between what the appropriations bill has laid out and where your amendment would take it?
I can, Mr. Woodall. I appreciate the chance because I believe I gave the wrong number in my opening statement. The total in the appropriations bill right now is $85.8 billion. Okay? The Defense Department has asked for $80.7 billion, roughly $5 billion less. Back in the NDAA, we had tried to reduce the authorization by that exact same $5 billion, but there was a question as to whether or not that would impact the National Guard. We have protected the $1.5 billion to address any shortfalls in the National Guard Reserve Component Equipment Modernization Fund. So instead of the $5 billion reduction we had in the NDAA, this is roughly $3.5 billion.
Okay. Thank you.
And I believe before I said it was an $85 billion reduction, but that is the number of the overall appropriation, so I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that.
Mr. Rourke, you and I bumped into each other in the hall early on in your tenure, and you said, Rob, I just came up here to get some things done. I'm going to work with whoever I can work with. I just want to fix things, and that's why I ran for Congress. I appreciate what you're trying to do on behalf of your folks back home. I have the same concern that I think Mr. Cole had, which is if we tell them not to do what they're doing, but we're not going to give them any more money to do anything else, kind of by definition, they would have to go after another priority, and you may well have identified some priorities that are lower spending priorities than those of those mission-critical civilian workers that you laid out. I just wanted to ask you, as you were visiting with folks on that issue, I have long said that I would join with anybody to do absolutely anything on the mandatory spending side of the ledger to eliminate sequestration altogether. No one of all the witnesses that we've had over 2.5 years of my being on this committee has ever said, you know what, I really love this sequestration thing, and I hope we'll just keep doing it year after year after year after year. Budget levels, perhaps, but not budget technique there. As you were talking with your co-sponsors, getting folks rallied around, again, a very serious issue for which folks have heartfelt concern, both for men and women in uniform and men and women employed in their districts. Any sense that you'll be able to find that bipartisan sweet spot to actually replace the sequester altogether, or are we still just talking about shifting dollars from one place to another place?
On the larger issue of the sequester, I think I join you and almost every other member of the House in saying that there's got to be a better solution to the long-term deficit and debt problems that we have in this country. And I stand willing to work and vote for something that may not be my ideal or perfect, but gets us past this very painful point in our country. Very, very painful for El Paso. In addition to the 11,000 DOD civilian employees, or another 11,000 non-DOD civilian employees or federal employees, Border Patrol, CBP, prison officers, federal public defenders, and others. So I stand ready to work towards that. I just have faith, frankly, in the Secretary of Defense, in the men and women who manage the other men and women who are standing up for our country, that they can deploy these assets much more intelligently than we are doing today. And it does seem like we're cutting our nose off to spite our face in not serving these soldiers, especially these wounded warriors who are returning home and taking every other day off, forcing the families who are serving them to take a 20% pay cut for the rest of this fiscal year. So I think we can do a better job, and this explicitly allows the Department of Defense to do that better job.
Thank you. Mr. Mosh, I know you've been working very hard on your amendment, your issue and some of the others. Well, I guess our issue, right? It's an American issue. It's one that you happen to be championing. We had a chance to talk to the subcommittee chairman earlier. I don't know if you were here when Mr. Young was testifying, but he said, listen, I've never, and you know Mr. Young's one of the longest serving members of this body. He said, I have never had a defense appropriations bill come to the floor under any process other than an open rule. He said, but this year there are things at play that involve classified information, and if I could have a closed-door debate with anyone in this body, I would have it, and I think we've reflected those priorities in the base text. But he said, I can't have a debate on the floor of the House. It's like having I think what he said is it just wouldn't be a fair fight. I know you've been working throughout the weekend, through most of last week on this. Tell me about that. Most of what I've learned about what the NSA is doing in my 2.5 years here has been from classified briefings downstairs. How is it that you see that we can have that fair discussion that the chairman laid out in an open session of Congress?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Fortunately, my amendment doesn't require discussion of any classified information. The discussion is things that have been released by the Director of National Intelligence. It's the discussion of phone records, which have been released by the Director of National Intelligence. And all we need to do is debate a simple question. Should we fund the NSA's potential collection of the personal data of Americans? And I think that's a debate we can have without disclosing any classified information. And I would also add that these issues will remain with us into the indefinite future. Are we going to consider every future DOD appropriations bill under a structured or closed rule? That would be a question to ask ourselves.
And in the thinking about things that are going to be with us forever, big fan of the open process. I don't have that fear that would change, though I have the benefit of sitting on the Rules Committee, so I don't worry about losing those votes or the chairman making other recommendations heading forward. But this can't be the end of this issue, not the open rules issue, but the NSA issue, right? I mean, a one-year fix on a DOD appropriations bill. I don't think that is a stopping a crisis. If there is a crisis, that's not solving a problem. If there's a long-term problem, is there a part two that we have to do in order to put this issue behind us forever?
Absolutely. As a body, we need to discuss the ways we might amend substantive legislation. I've got a bill called the Liberty Act that I think would correct some of the problems with the Patriot Act. There are others who have great ideas about how we might make this process more open or improve upon the foundation we have so that the American people can have confidence that their personal information is secure and not being used to watch them.
And I must say to my friend from Massachusetts, to have the chairman of the Republican Study Committee sitting not 2.5 feet away from you. You mentioned earlier that if there are going to be budget caps, there ought to be budget caps, and we like the caps, not like the caps, but we ought to stick to the caps. I'm very proud that the Republican Study Committee is leading an effort to say we did a good job with our 302B allocations here in the House, but if the Senate and the President can't get behind our 302B allocations, we shouldn't bust the caps. The caps are the law of the land. If we're not going to change the law of the land, we should stick with the law of the land exactly as it is today. I know that's not an easy position to lead on in the context of DOD in particular, but it is the right thing to do, and I'm grateful to the gentleman for what he's doing to lead on that issue. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want, for the record, I did not advocate that we stick to these sequestration games. I was just pointing out kind of how you guys have different rules for defense appropriations than you do for some of the domestic spending. I was just pointing that out. I think what we've heard over and over and over again is that we need to fix sequestration. And the only person that's brought any alternative sequestration up to the Rules Committee this year that I can remember is Mr. Van Hollen. And so we ought to have a vote on an alternative to sequestration. We ought to have a budget conference. I mean, we ought to, everyone talks about regular order. We ought to do regular order, not waiting for this mysterious day that the president's going to come walking through the door, and just sit down with the Republicans in the House alone and try to work out a deal. I mean, we're the legislative branch. We're supposed to take action and present things to the president. So I hope we will do that. Let me just say, if we have an open rule, all your amendments are going to be made in order. So that's if we stick with the way we've been doing regular appropriations bills, all your amendments in order. We'll have a good debate on the floor, up or down. I just want to say, with regard to Mr. Amash's amendment, we heard earlier today that somehow this year, as opposed to all the other years that we've been in existence, but this year, things are so sensitive that we might not be able to have a public debate on some of these issues. I mean, that it might involve classified information. Well, to people who are wondering what the big clamor is about, read the New York Times, read the Washington Post, watch any of the major networks, watch Fox News, watch ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, C-SPAN. I mean, all of kind of the details of the NSA program have been laid out there. And people in my district, like people in your district, are shocked. And it's not just Democrats, it's Republicans, it's not just liberals, it's conservatives, everybody in between. People think that there's been this incredible overreach. It happened when President Bush was in office. It's happening now that President Obama's in office. There's bipartisan, blame to go around. But clearly something that impacts our civil liberties as much as this does deserves a debate in the United States Congress. And I think the American people are ready for this debate. They're hoping we're going to have this debate. I hope that your amendment's made in order. I hope if it is made in order that you get more than 10 minutes, because this, quite frankly, should involve a week of debate, because it's about who we are as a country. And look, I think everybody wants to ensure that we protect our citizens, but they also understand that we also need to protect our civil liberties. I mean, majority rules how all these votes turn out, but on this, I think there is bipartisan concern, and I think to the extent that we don't address this issue, you're going to have more and more frustrated constituents saying, "Why aren't you talking about this?" Because you're reading about it every day in the newspapers, you're watching it every day on TV. We ought to tell the American people where we stand on this. So I hope your amendment is in order. I hope we have an open rule. And Madam Chair, I will yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis?
Yeah, this is a question for Mr. Amash. Can you describe the response that you're getting in your district on this issue?
Well, as others have stated, it's a bipartisan concern. You hear about this issue, the NSA collection of records from both Republicans and Democrats, from conservatives and liberals and others, and the American people are demanding that we do something about it, that we at least take some concrete steps to address this issue. It's not a partisan issue. It's something that cuts across the entire political spectrum. And I frequently hear from my constituents, well, you're the House, you have control over appropriations, don't you? Why can't you at least offer some amendment, some legislation to at least stop funding for some of the collection that people find unacceptable?
And do you feel that this issue can be appropriately debated in an open environment without any members having to resort to secret information to make their arguments?
I think the debate on my amendment can be discussed in the open. It's just a question of whether you think the collection of Americans' personal data should be permitted without violating the Fourth Amendment.
And currently, that information is being collected even without any accusation of wrongdoing, not to mention any particular court order or order from a FISA court. I mean, even for people of whom, even from you and I, for instance, the information could be gathered. Is that correct?
Well, as the Director of National Intelligence has stated, yes. In fact, they publicly released on their website that they renewed their order to collect Americans' telephone records. This is public information coming from the Director of National Intelligence.
Yeah, and your amendment would simply make it sure that some court appropriately, in the case where it needs to remain secret, validates that flow of information to the government. Is that correct?
That's right. In order for funds to be used by the NSA, the court order would have to have a statement limiting the collection of records to those records that pertain to a person under investigation. So if the court order doesn't have that statement, the NSA doesn't receive the funding to collect those records.
And like yourself, hearing from the residents of my district, Democrat, Republican, Independent, there is strong support for this. In fact, I don't think a single constituent of mine has advocated the other direction. I don't think I've gotten any calls saying that it's good that the NSA has all our information. Not one. It's very rare that there is such an enormous drop-off on two sides of the issue. But all of the contact I've received have been in favor of the concepts that are enclosed in your amendment. So I really hope your amendment is made in order. I look forward to, if it is, hopefully speaking to its import on the floor of the House.
Would the gentleman yield?
And I'll be happy to yield to the gentleman from Georgia.
I thank my friend. Listen to that conversation. What makes this so hard to discuss back home in town hall meetings? I believe that all of the information that's being collected today is being collected pursuant to a court order. There's absolutely no information being collected in the absence of a court order. It's just a question of what that standard is.
Right. Well, reclaiming my time, I believe if there's a court order in place, it's broad enough to encompass all of the information. It is not particular to individuals who might be under investigation. Again, perhaps the gentleman from Michigan can further clarify, but I believe if there is a court order, it's broad enough to encompass all of the information. It doesn't pertain to a particular individual. I'll yield to the gentleman from Michigan.
Well, that's the indication from the Director of National Intelligence, which can be found on DNI's website.
That it is all being collected pursuant to a court order.
Pursuant to a court order, yes.
And if the gentleman would yield just
be happy to.
One more moment, I think what makes it most troubling to those of us who've been here 2.5 years or less is my understanding is there's absolutely no accusation of rogue activity. It's not like the IRS accusation that there are 2 rogue employees in the Cincinnati office.
Reclaiming my time, no, thank goodness President Obama isn't some tyrant that would ever, misuse power. Thank goodness we have such an enlightened president that would never exceed his authority. I'm glad the gentleman from Georgia agrees with me. There's never been a misuse, but it's certainly possible that future presidents or people in the national security apparatus could misuse this personal information. And I think that's the concern that's being articulated. I certainly appreciate the gentleman from Georgia's respect for President Obama not exceeding his authority, but I think that there could be, we can't speak to future presidents or other members of our national security apparatus. I'll be happy to yield to the gentleman from Georgia.
I appreciate the gentleman, and I appreciate that he knows me so well. He knew exactly where my passions were going to take me. What I was actually going to say was that what's most outrageous here is there is no accusation of rogue activity, that this is all something that previous Congresses have authorized, that previous presidents have known about. This isn't at all an agent run amok. This is a function of a Congress.
Reclaiming my
that
time,
absolutely
of course.
No idea this was going on.
Reclaiming my time, I do have confidence in the current Commander-in-Chief and President, as the gentleman from Georgia does, that they would not misuse for political reasons this information. That giving such a tool to the Chief Executive or the military in any scenario is a dangerous risk. Imagine if you had a president or a head of a national security apparatus with less than honest intentions, or intentions to set up some kind of tyrannical state or police state. What better tool than this broad-based access of information about American citizens? I'll yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
I just want to point out, I voted against the Patriot Act because I thought it was written in a way that was too broad, but the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, who was the author of the Patriot Act, when all these revelations became public, said he was shocked and believes that we ought to go back and we ought to figure out a way to tighten some of the controls. My biggest question is who's watching the watches? I mean, there's some reasonable questions that whether you support the program or not, that ought to be debated. I think look, this is a big deal, and I think the fact that we're having hesitation about whether we should even bring this thing up, for a real debate, I think troubles people who are watching these proceedings. But I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I yield back in my time.
Sure, I'll be happy to go to the gentleman from Michigan. Did you have a further comment on this?
Well, I think it's an important issue. It's a critical issue, as the gentleman from Georgia has indicated. There's more that we must do, but I think that it's a first step and a welcome step. And for those who supported the Patriot Act, believing that it had more limitations than what we've been that we now know it has under the interpretation of the court, I think this is important for them to get the chance to take a vote on an amendment like this.
I encourage the Amash amendment to be allowed, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, gentleman. Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Amash, let me just ask you, could you walk us through what would be the practical effect? Your amendment's made in order and passes. What actually happens?
Sure. The NSA would be allowed to collect data and records under the Patriot Act, as they have always done, but the court would have to have a statement indicating that the collection of data is limited to the collection of those records that pertain to a person under investigation.
What would happen to investigations that are actually already ongoing?
To ongoing investigations?
Correct.
Those investigations would have to change how they operate.
So after the start of the new fiscal year, October 1st? We're talking about an appropriations bill for next fiscal year.
That's right.
That'd be correct.
So all of the ongoing investigations would actually have to restructure?
Well, you'd have to have a court statement limiting the collection of records to those records that pertain to a person under investigation.
Do you have a sense, because they would obviously have some time to adjust, it's 3 months away or a little less than 3 months, do you have a sense as to whether or not that is something, we can't talk about things, but I don't really even know how many investigations are currently ongoing and what the personnel requirements would be to make those adjustments.
I don't. That would be classified.
Well, I'm glad Mr. McGovern brought up Mr. Sensenbrenner's concerns, because I think that there are a number of us who feel that this program has changed from its last reauthorization. And while we're assured that it's always been this way, it does seem that it is that the degree of surveillance is in excess of what my understanding was. Now, you don't address in this language whether or not this person is a citizen or not a citizen of the United States. I mean, that was obviously one of the stipulations previously. This would be to anyone.
This would simply require the court to put a statement in its order limiting the collection of records to those records that pertain to a person under investigation, and the person under investigation would have to comply with the requirements of the Patriot Act, of course.
Well, realistically, I hope the gentleman's amendment is made in order, because I think this is a debate we need to have. I think Mr. McGovern's right. The time for this debate is going to be much longer than what will be available to us on the floor. But I hope the gentleman's amendment is made in order.
Would the gentleman?
Yeah, I'll be happy to yield.
Being familiar with criminal investigations, I mean, this is so sweeping in regards to what the federal government has done under FISA. Hopefully, not only we have this discussion in the appropriation process, but when the reauthorization comes up, we certainly should have a huge amount of input in regards to what we think is legitimate. I understand investigations and the scope, but when you just go out trolling, I think that is where people here, or at least people back home, are upset with the fact that it's so broad. And it just seems the scope is so broad. And all this discussion, I think, is going to be a precursor as to the real discussion that we have when the authorization comes back up, so we can actually, whether it's classified, we can go into a classified setting to hear information to help us make a decision, but typically, to really drill down and make sure that whatever the Patriot Act looks like, it may look different after that reauthorization, and I think that's where, we really need to be focused as a laser as we move forward. So I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate.
And I concur with the gentleman's assessment. The reauthorization of the intelligence statute comes up before the end of the fiscal year, and you're right. We should be focused on it. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The chair does not see any additional questions, any member seeking additional time. I want to thank all four of you for taking time to be here today, and thank you very much. You're now excused. We'll now call up the next panel. I see two members who are seeking that time, Ms. Gabbard and the gentleman from Texas, the gentlewoman from Hawaii, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert. As always, without objection, anything you have in writing, we'll enter that into the record. If you would choose to do that, we're delighted that you're both here tonight. Your ideas are important to this committee. We appreciate you taking time to be with us, and as always, I would suggest to you that your ideas you should have the confidence that we will be available and ready for your ideas, and with a chance to do the very best we can in making them available to you on the floor. That said, the gentlewoman from the Aloha State is recognized.
Aloha to you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Slaughter, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify regarding Amendment Number 155. The Navy, in particular within the Asia-Pacific region, has acknowledged a growing threat involving an aging and shrinking strike reach, while potential opponents' attack reach is expanding and modernizing. And it's because of this growing recognition that the Navy may once again find its dominance at sea contested, that the service is exploring new weapons in order to successfully execute the strategic rebalance of military assets to the Asia-Pacific region. My amendment specifically concerns the U.S. Navy's offensive anti-surface warfare weapon and the air-launched long-range anti-ship missile program. Developing these capabilities is specifically aimed at addressing a readiness and capability gap by providing a new generation of anti-ship weapons, offering longer range and better odds in dealing with the growing threat of an improved air defense system in the region. The House Armed Services Committee has recognized the urgent need for both of these programs, which were originally requested in 2009 and noted that it is more relevant today than ever before to meet our national security objectives and rebalance to the Asia-Pacific region. Providing these new capabilities will allow the United States to stand off from adversaries' direct counter-fire range and be able to safely engage and destroy high-value targets they engage from an extended range. The House Armed Services Committee earlier this year fully authorized the funding at the Pentagon's request level for both programs. The first one, the Offensive Anti-Surface Warfare, the original amount requested was $136 million. HASC authorized $136 million, and the Appropriations Committee reduced that amount by $87 million to an amount of $49. With the second program, the Long Range Anti-Ship Missile Program, the original request from Defense was $75.6 million. House Armed Services authorized $75.6 million, and the Appropriations Committee funded it at a reduction of $17 million, $58.6. This amendment offsets this increase, restoring it back to the original amount that was authorized through the House Armed Services Committee. According to CBO, this amendment does not change the 2014 discretionary budget authority provided in the bill and would reduce 2014 discretionary outlays by $15 million. Offsets in this increase would come from reducing the O&M defense-wide account by $104 million. These programs are strongly supported by Admiral Locklear, U.S. PACOM commander, who presented a very strongly worded letter to the Appropriations Defense Subcommittee, basically saying that with these harsh reductions in these programs, it will derail the efforts of PACOM to outpace an expanding threat, increasingly constrain our regional response options, and potentially erode regional confidence in our commitment to the rebalance. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today and appreciate your consideration in ruling this amendment in order so that we can stay on track as we look towards the Asia-Pacific rebalance. Thank you very much.
Appreciate the gentlewoman's testimony. Gentleman from Texas, the great judge from Tyler, Texas, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your time and attention tonight. My amendment is a one-page amendment. It's number 27. It goes back 2 years and 4 months, 5 months ago, when I became concerned that, because I was hearing from our military members and their spouses, that with people in harm's way, they shouldn't have to spend their time while dodging bullets and IEDs and RPGs, wondering if there was going to be money coming in that next month. And I know it's always a concern for anybody, whether they're going to get their paycheck the next month. But particularly people, as George Washington referred to them in his resignation and a prayer that we would protect those who serve in the field. This is what my amendment does. It is, I offered a bill back 2 years and about 5 months ago that would have ensured that the military got paid regardless of what the reason is for the stoppage, so they would never be in harm's way wondering if they were going to get a check if something went wrong and Congress didn't get their money done or some problem. This has been done with Social Security, so that Social Security recipients, if there is any kind of stoppage, the checks still go out. The money is there, and that would still happen. So I must have stepped on some toes and got somebody concerned, because I got word that somebody sent my amendment to be scored, which seems pretty silly because it came back with a lot of money, but it was exactly what the military will be paid. They're paid as if the stoppage never occurred, whether it's hitting the budget ceiling, whether it's a shutdown of the government. People in harm's way should never have to worry about whether or not their check is coming. Then I got word that there might be an objection from the committee that it was legislating. But from my understanding of legislating, the way it's been explained by the parliamentarian, and these debates have occurred before, if it requires the decision be made by some minister, bureaucrat somewhere, then that would be require, that would be legislating. This doesn't require any decision to be made by anybody. It just means the checks keep going no matter what happens, so that people, as they are losing their lives, don't have to worry about whether their check will be there for their families back home. That's why I make this amendment. I don't believe it's legislating. It's certainly not going to increase spending, because it would be at the exact same level as if there were no stoppage. So that's my proposal, very simply. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, gentlemen, for his testimony, and I appreciate him being here. Ms. Gabbard, I listened to your testimony and remember back a few years ago as we were dealing with threats from the Iranians about high-speed projectiles, projectiles that could be done quickly from a speedier boat than might be a destroyer or an aircraft carrier, and one which could be dropped in the water and travel presumably hundreds of miles very rapidly. Is that what you're in reference to?
Yes, it is, and the same things that you're referring to, the same types of threats, are exactly the concern that exists within the Asia-Pacific region, and where the consensus absolutely is that we need to be proactive to make sure that we're not falling behind the curve as this technology continues to advance.
So the threats against this nation continue, and we need to make sure that we offer funding levels that are appropriate to make sure we save the men and women, which is more than that. It's also the prestige and ability of the Navy to comprehend and do something about this. I want to thank you very much for your insight in doing this. Obviously, your proximity to the fleet is important, and I'm delighted that you have that opportunity to visit with them. And I want to thank you, Judge, for being here, and thank you very much for your amendment. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions, but I thank our colleagues for being here.
Gentlewoman from New York.
I also thank you for being here. And of course, thinking about the Asian Pacific, which we certainly have not been paying a lot of attention to since 1941. I appreciate you bringing it to our attention, Judge. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Thank you. Recognized as what?
Recognized as awesome, and that for any time that he would, the young gentleman from Utah.
It would be unfair. I haven't heard the testimony. I apologize. I have a question.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Sure. Both great amendments. Good to hear from both my colleagues. I want to assure you that they're excellent and I want to support them.
Gentleman from Florida. Gentleman from Colorado.
Do testimony on my own amendment, but I think we'll do that.
I promise to get to you.
Great. No further
Which
questions.
is-
Thank you for the testimony.
Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say to my friend from Texas how much I appreciate his amendment. I had the great pleasure of voting for it 2 years and 5 months ago. I'm trying to think through what that means on the Rules Committee to create a new mandatory spending title, and it's hard to see. I see how the parliamentary guidance you may have received was that it would not be in order under a normal open rule, because I think all appropriated spending stops in those circumstances. Those categories of spending that you observed, Social Security spending, Medicare spending, and some others are all in the mandatory spending category that required a separate authorization. But our parliamentarians are the brightest in the crowd. Were you able to have a discussion with them about changes that might push it in one direction or another?
I appreciate the question, and actually they communicated they had concerns, and so I have not talked to them at this time, but I would point out that the spending that the gentleman refers to as mandatory became such by language like this being in the bill, and so I think it's right in line with what's been done before.
Certainly, That's the great irony. All the spending has to originate here in the House. It just could have originated back in 1935 instead of at a time when you and I got a chance to vote on it. This is absolutely a problem that's not going to go away. If we can't solve it on an annual appropriations bill, I hope we will solve it on an authorizing bill. It is shameful that those families have those concerns when we can prevent. Can't prevent all the fear these men and women face, but we can absolutely prevent the fear that their paycheck won't show up. And I thank the gentleman for his leadership on this.
Gentleman yields back time. Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nucci, is recognized.
Well, I will tell you that it was real in their minds because I got a call from a young lieutenant who was in Iraq at the time asking me, hey, Dad, rumor is my guys aren't going to get paid. And you go, listen, son, over my dead body. That's just ridiculous. I understand the whole parliamentarian issue. I understand legislating, through appropriations. But this one just makes sense. We put these kids in harm's way, and they do it willingly. But they also have families back home that have to make a payment on a car or for their child's tuition to school or whatever the issue may be. And they can't even go home and look at their wife in the face and say, you know what, sweetie, we're just not going to have money to do the things that we need to do. And they have to do it over Skype or some other device from a battlefield. And so you want, I've had 2 in combat, and you want them not to have to worry about what's going on at home. That's the last thing that these kids should have to worry about is what's going on at home. And so we should do everything in our power to make sure that our men and women not only are the best equipped and best trained, but that when they do go to the fight, they're not worrying about how their family is going to be fed or make the car payment. We should guarantee, if there's a guarantee, we guarantee all kinds of stuff to people around this country, and that's one guarantee we ought to stand up and do the right thing by those that are actually sacrificing for this country. This isn't like, hey, listen, something happened, but they're sacrificing for this country. And so we need to do everything in our power to make sure that they don't have to worry about that. I don't ever want to get a call from one of my sons in combat to worry about his troops, whether they're going to get paid. Like my one son said, Dad, he said, I can probably make it because I don't have a wife, but, I got a lot of guys that are in combat with me that have that worry. And so I just would suggest to this body that we make sure that should not be a concern for those men and women. So I want to thank you for the amendment. I want to thank you for your service, too. And so I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. I would like to reiterate that I believe that the comments that the gentleman is receiving are heartfelt from the committee about the timing that this takes place and has taken place in our past. And so you're really appreciated, and I hope that you do get that feeling of support. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Webster, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I was remembering correctly back when you filed that bill. Isn't there a website so the military can see what their next pay is going to be? And there was great consternation over the fact that we were running out of money halfway through the pay period, and so they posted half of the salary. It was half, I think. Was that correct?
They did. That's correct.
Okay. Well, personally, I don't believe that we would be creating an entitlement that is not a non-appropriated entitlement. We already have one of those. That's the SNAP program is a entitlement program. However, it is an appropriated program. And I don't see why this wouldn't fit in the same category. So thanks for bringing it forward.
Thank you. Gentleman from Florida, Dr. Birch, is recognized.
Actually, Texas, but close enough.
Gentleman from Texas.
And the gentleman from Florida is exactly right. And this is on April 8th of 2011, when people went to their MyPay account and found that they were only being paid through the 8th, when the pay period ended on the 15th. And it was disruptive. So I thank the gentleman for bringing the amendment to the committee. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Are there further questions from the committee? Thank you very much to both of you for taking time to be here. And I appreciate each of you knowing that ultimately I would get to you. This committee has chosen to listen to every one of your words, and I think you've been duly empowered to know that we appreciate your strong thinking, sense of duty to the men and women of the military, and I hope that you know that tonight when you go to bed you can feel like you did a job well done. Thank you very much. You're now excused. The chair now sees no further member that seeks recognition. Excuse me. The gentleman does see the gentleman from Colorado with the promise that he would be entitled to offer his amendment. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I have two amendments I want to speak about today. One I'm the lead sponsor of, and that is a amendment that would make a reduction of $107 million in the funding to begin the procurement of 14 ground-based missile interceptor systems. These just recently failed a test just this last July 5th. I think that before we sink in more money and throw good money after bad, the system should pass several tests before it's deployed. We need to make sure our systems are properly tested and actually keep Americans safe before we spend our taxpayer money on this kind of program. I also want to speak to an amendment that I co-sponsored, Representative Barbara Lee, Blumenauer, Schrader, and Conyers, that would provide a 1% cut to this appropriations overall funding level, excluding the Defense Health Program and military personnel accounts, so not cutting the salaries or compensation or support for our men and women in the field. But nevertheless, with the war ending in Iraq and Afghanistan, we need to be prepared to spend within our means. I think 1% is a reasonable start in terms of making the sensible reductions that we need to eliminate wasteful spending across the board and balance our budget. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I thank the gentleman and would recognize anyone from your side that might have questions for you.
I have no question, but I would like to have some amendments made for it.
And I thank the gentlewoman and see no one else. Is there anyone on the Republican side that would wish to offer a question to the gentleman from Colorado about his amendment? Seeing none, I want to thank the gentleman for taking time to allow us to recognize you and for you to bring your two amendments. At this time, I will tell you that I've been advised by staff that they anticipate that there will be a short time period that would be required between the time we go to recess and we come back subject to the call of the chair. If at any point that were to move longer, I would notify us very quickly. So we will be subject to call of the chair, waiting for us to get back together, and it's my hope to be done very quickly. So we'll notify you if that changes. Thank you. The hearing is closed. Committee will be in order, and thank you very much for coming back. In fact, it was a short break, and I want to thank my Democrat colleagues for coming back also. The chair will be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 2397, the Department of Defense Appropriations Act 2014, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the committee. On appropriations, the rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read through page 157, line 2. The rule waives points of order against provisions in the bill for failure to comply with Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in the Rules Committee report, the amendment described in Section 2 of the resolution, and amendments en bloc described in Section 3 of the resolution. The rule waives all points of order against amendments printed in the Rules Committee report and against amendments en bloc described in Section 3 of the resolution. The rule provides that each amendment printed in the Rules Committee report shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, may be withdrawn by the proponent at any time before action thereon, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. Section 2 of the rule provides that after disposition of amendments printed in the report and amendments en bloc described in Section 3 of the resolution, shall be in order for the chair of the Committee on Appropriations or his designee to offer an amendment reducing funding levels in the bill. Section 3 of the rule provides that it shall be in order at any time for the chair of the Committee on Appropriations or his designee to offer amendments en bloc consisting of amendments printed in the report not earlier disposed of. Amendments en bloc shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for 20 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations, where their designees shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The original proponent of an amendment included in such amendments en bloc may insert a statement in the congressional record. Section 4 of the rule provides that after the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, there shall be in order a final period of general debate which shall not exceed 10 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. Section 5 of the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 6 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 2610, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development and Related Agencies Appropriations Act 2014 under an open rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule waives points of order against provisions in the bill for failure to comply with Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The rule authorizes the chair to accord priority and recognition to members who pre-printed their amendments in the congressional record. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
Yeah, I heard the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. I'd like to defer to the gentleman, Mr. Nugent, to discuss the rule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This rule does provide for consideration of H.R. 2610, the Transportation and Housing Appropriation Bill, under an open amendment process. H.R. 2397, the Defense Appropriations Bill, will be considered under a structured amendment process. While that is a departure from a normal process on appropriation bills, we felt it's important to have an orderly amendment process on several sensitive ongoing issues with tremendous impacts on national security. The committee received 180 amendments, aside from the amendments addressing Egypt, Syria, and the activities of the NSA. The rule makes in order all amendments not otherwise subject to a point of order. The committee did make in order one amendment each on the issues of Egypt, Syria, and the activities of the NSA. Each will have an extended time for debate. In total, the rule makes in order more than 100 amendments. The rule also provides the committee with floor management tools to expedite consideration of those amendments, and finally provides for a final period of wrap-up debate. In all, given our constraints, this is an extremely fair rule that allows for debate on all major issues. And there's actually 2 amendments on NSA, just to correct.
That would be correct, and the gentleman's would be one of them.
Yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his explanation. I thank the gentlewoman for a motion. The we would now be open for discussion or amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Before I do the amendment, I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert the amendment of John Conyers and Sheila Jackson.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I'm, as usual, going to call for an open rule. I want the committee to grant this bill an open rule so that we all have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bill on the floor, and I'd like to speak to it for just a moment, if I could.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
This bill is enormous in its scope. We are considering the largest spending bill of the year. The defense bill spends over $500 billion more money than every other appropriation bill combined. Of all spending bills, we need not close the one that spends all the most money to start closing down the process. And in regards to that, I'd like to give a quote from Speaker Boehner that he made in 2011. Quote, "You will not have the right to willfully disrupt the proceedings of the people's house, but you will always have the right to a robust debate and an open process that allows you to represent your constituents, to make your case, offer alternatives, and to be heard," end quote. That should probably be embroidered and put in everybody's office. I think it's so well stated. And so I'd like to ask, please, if we could have, like to make a suggestion that we make an open rule for this most important bill. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Does anyone else wish to be heard? I want to thank the gentlewoman very much. As she knows, I have, while not been seated in the same chair that she has, I spent a good number of years, 4, with what I would say a different opinion than perhaps what the chairman might want to have when I was in the minority. In the 111th Congress, each member of the minority voted in favor of a structured rule on the defense appropriations bill. That rule made an order less than 15% made an order under the rule. The people who voted for that included Mr. McGovern, Mr. Hastings, Mr. Polis, and Ms. Slaughter. There are times when decisions must be made, and I will accept full responsibility. I've just come back from speaking with the members of my committee, of which I'm the chairman, and I discussed with them rather openly about the decision-making process that I have been under for the last few weeks, probably 3, maybe 4 weeks, as I became anticipatory of where we might be tonight. It became something that I thought about often, and I have always wanted to, and I do believe, making as many amendments as possible, as when I was sitting perhaps down this row, as something that I would do if I were chairman, if it is within my purview to try and lead. In this case, I have attempted to look through the amendments, not knowing exactly what would come in, and we made, forget what Rich said, some 100 in order. And they are bipartisan. They deal with the guts of the issues that we would talk about, whether it's NSA. We had an opportunity to hear today from someone who perhaps I might disagree with, but who I fully was willing to try and make that in order. And I think that that's really the beauty of this thing, even when you disagree, if you're willing to have the debate. With that said, this could go on for weeks, and we could find ourselves in a circumstance where we end up with a bill that does not resemble the real essence of the case. And I think if there's one thing, it would be true to say that I have not supported an open rule. I have allowed as many good, structured opportunities in this to debate the essence of this. And so I do respect, Jill Woman's recognized.
Does that mean that you're not going to support me?
That does mean that my final answer would be that I would ask the committee to recognize my members, because I've just come out of this meeting with some really strong opinions that could be very supportive of your position. I explained to myself, to my own membership, this is, as you know, the chairman has to make lots of decisions and deal with lots of people, I tried to justify my position. And the justification is upon the end product that I believe I'm presenting to the committee to ask for their vote. Further discussion on the amendment by the gentlewoman from New York. Seeing none, those in favor of the Slaughter Amendment will signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. No, the noes have it. The gentlewoman asked for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox? Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Ross-Leitman?
No.
Ms. Ross-Leitman, no. Mr. Burgess? Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Not agreed to. Further discussion or amendment? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
May we have another roll call?
Roll call.
Ms. Fox? Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Ross-Leitman?
Aye.
Ms. Ross-Leitman, aye. Mr. Burgess? Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Motion is agreed to, and the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nugent, will be handling this for the Republicans,
And Mr. McGovern for the Democrats.
and the gentleman from Massachusetts will be handling for the Democrats. I want to thank each and every member of this committee for taking time to engage the guests that we had, the members of our body, as they came up. I felt like that both sides were exceedingly generous in not only their appreciation of the ideas that were presented today, but became engaged in that. And I do appreciate that on behalf of the committee. I think our good name was done well today. The committee is scheduled to meet tomorrow at 3 p.m. on 2 bills from the Energy and Commerce Committee. That ends our business for the day.